This is Jason Lee Willis reading The Alchemist Stone. This is Part 6, Chapter 80, The Haunted Valley, September 12th, 1700. A thick fog hung in the air, cloaking everything but the edges of the shore. The previous evening, LeSueur recognized the sheer bluff that forced two rivers to change their course and flow north. Knowing the region's rivers were filled with logs and rocks, LeSueur anchored for the night and ordered that all the men stay on board. As he pulled up the anchor, he realized the insane plan hatched years ago might actually happen. Knowing that countless Sisseton Sioux families might have already gathered nearby, LeSueur woke the men as quietly as he could. Slipping the oars of the felucca into the shallow waters of the Makato, they began their trek into the haunted valley. No one stirred when they passed quietly through the morning fog as the Mikado flowed from the south. After a jog to the east, the river again straightened to continue flowing from the south. LeSueur watched the trees for any sign of the Sioux. "Is that smoke coming from that mountain?" Pennicott asked under his breath. "Shh," Father Marius answered, keeping watch on the prow also. "I think we are safe," LeSueur said in full voice, and the whole crew relaxed. Winona said. LeSueur almost began another sentence with it again, but stopped short. "The Sioux will gather together along the shores of the St. Pierre River at a place they call Land of Memories. The western Sioux and the northern Sioux push the buffalo herds into the Moinagana Valley, where the eastern Sioux help hunt and slaughter them for the whole nation. But this place we are about to go, none of them would enter unless their lives were in danger." "Why?" Pennicott asked. "There is an evil spirit that lives in the valley, guarding over it. We will have the place to ourselves. The haunted valley begins 7 miles to the west, at the place where the Watonwan River joins with the Makato. There are other rivers to the south, the Tuapatankian and the Tuapadan, that form the southern borders of the haunted valley. We will be camped along another river that comes from the east." "What river is that?" Remy Dupree asked. "The River of Death. We will call it the St. Remy River." Dupree smiled. By mid-morning, they had reached their destination. With the fog lifting, LeSueur could see he was in the wide bowl. Along the eastern bank, he could see the steep bluff where he would build Fort LeSueur. A few hundred yards to the south, he could see the Yunkalo spilling its innocuous waters into the Mikado. "We've been strangely blessed," LeSueur said as they anchored the felucca in the middle of the river. "Stealth has given us a great opportunity, and I do not intend on losing it. Gaston, I need you to make sure none of the men use rifles until we have built palisades. I forbid any of you from using them. Is that understood? For now, use traps and hunt like savages. Understood?" Gaston Verdi nodded. "It makes perfect sense. Andre, now we will need your skills." LeSueur addressed the men. "Now I understand Pennicott is the youngest among us, but he is in command of building Fort LeSueur. Anything he says should be obeyed as if it is King Louis himself. Until this fort is built, we are vulnerable. It is your top priority." The men nodded, understanding the danger. "I will take a small hunt scouting party composed of Father Marius, Gaston Verdi, Sergeant Sagen, and Colin Nain with me to make sure we are indeed alone. We can unload the mining equipment after the palisade is built. We have at least 10 hours of daylight remaining, and by the time I return, I want the top of that bluff felled. Understood?" Pulling up the 2 small canoes that had been dragged behind the felucca since the swamps of Louisiana, LeSueur stepped off the ship and quickly surrounded himself with his adversaries. Once he led them to the vitriol, he knew his life was suddenly expendable. So he delayed the inevitable by showing them the western prairie between the Makato and the Tuapatakian River where he and his men could hunt. He also showed them where Yunkalo turned back to the east, where it found its beginning near distant Lake Acamon. At this place, they all waded across the muddy river and returned from the east. "If we set up a watch post along the edge of this ridge, LeSueur said as they looked back into the bowl where they had left the felucca, we could not only see hostiles approaching from the east, but will also have time to prepare our defenses. Sergeant Sajan took a moment to study the terrain. In the distance, LeSueur could see the white cotton shirts of the men laboring to clear trees for the fort. I'm beginning to understand why you and Lemoyne sent so few men, Sajan began. This valley is all but hidden until you stand right on the edge of the ridge, and at that point your approach is visible for at least a mile in all directions. I think we can make an imposing defense. What about the mine? Colin Nain asked after an afternoon of silence. Let me show you, LeSueur said. At the bottom of the valley-like ravine, a wide field of grass stood between them and the wooded butte beside the confluence of the two rivers. As they neared, LeSueur saw a new shape beside that of a copper mound and stone altar. Sajan saw it too. Sacre bleu, that little bastard, he muttered, knowing who'd left it years earlier. Thrust into the side of the mound of rusting copper was a tall metal pole with a lead plaque as a head. What is it? Gaston Verdi asked. Someone has been here since my last visit, LeSueur said. The stone altar, which had been decorated with the skulls of explorers from bygone expeditions, was now empty. Who left it? Father Marius asked. Louis Armand d'Arcy, Baron of Lahatan, LeSueur silently answered, knowing the truth about his rival. But just as when Winona had brought him to the place, Lahatan could do nothing except steal a historical relic from the altar. Lahatan wanted the Sioux to know he had been there, so he left the official French seal that prompted the Sioux to flood the Great Lakes a decade earlier. Who left it? Father Marius repeated. I have no idea. LeSueur answered, studying how the iron pole remained black at the top and a brilliant orange near its base. When LeSueur touched it, the iron crumbled to dust, and LeSueur caught the lead plaque. 12 years in the ground, the pole had rusted as it had been there 200 years in submerged water, LeSueur observed. This isn't natural, Colin Nain observed as his foot prodded at the moist mound of vitriol. Now do you understand why I agreed to bring a priest? LeSueur asked, turning to Father Marius. There is a reason this place is called the Haunted Valley. Sorcery fills this valley. Chapter 81. Fort LeSueur, September 26, 1700. The Haunted Valley struck quickly, faster than any of LeSueur's enemies could even hatch a plan. We're going to die, aren't we? Andre Pennicott asked as he looked out the window. This is really bad, isn't it? Don't be a child. LeSueur sat with his scarred feet and legs propped up on a log, warming them near the cast-iron stove filled with red-hot coals. This is just a small setback. The snow must be 2 feet deep, Pennicott continued from under his bearskin hood. I've never seen so much snow. It's going to bury us alive. Father Marius scoffed. Sit down and shut up for a few minutes. The snow is at the least of your concerns, isn't it, Monsieur Verdi? Gaston Verdi rested in his bed atop his blankets. Despite the blizzard raging outside, the log cabin held the heat. At least we're safe from Indians. LeSueur laughed, but soon his smile crept away. We will need to go out tomorrow, even if the storm does not stop. Everyone is already exhausted from building, and foolishly ate those 3 deer in just 2 days. We'll die of starvation long before the snow buries us, Andre Pennicott. We're going to have to use muskets, Gaston Verdi solemnly declared. I know, LeSueur relented. We can only hope that the Sioux are hunkered down also. Shots being heard will be the lesser of 2 evils. Remy, will you be able to hunt in this snow this deep? Tracking will be easy, Remy Dupree said from his corner of the cabin while his brother slept. The 6 men spent the better part of 3 days just watching as the fire fed upon countless logs. The winds will be worse out on the prairie, LeSueur added. The valley will be the only shelter the animals can find. Perhaps the woods will be thick with game when this is over. LeSueur leaned forward and felt his socks, which had finally dried. With a groan, he leaned over and slipped them back over his feet. His boots, which rested in front of the fire, had long since dried and were toasty warm. "What are you doing?" Father Marius asked. "What's the point of going back out there until the storm ends?" "I'm bored," LeSueur admitted, "and I think the storm is ending. The timbers are not creaking like they were yesterday." "Can I go with you?" "Weren't you just the one saying the storm was going to bury us alive?" LeSueur scoffed. While he wanted the young man in his cabin, he didn't fully trust being alone with him and ignored the request. "Verdi, are you up for taking a hike?" Gaston sighed and slipped a cap onto his bald head. "Fine. I guess dying would at least give me something to do." Dressed in layers of clothing, the two stepped out into the wind and snow. A 10-foot tall wooden palisade encircled 5 log cabins. 4 had been built as barracks, and a 5th had been built simply as a storeroom. Drifts of snow, 3 to 4 feet deep, formed inside the western wall and beside the cabins. LeSueur found a shallow path where the wind kept the heavy snow from collecting, and led Verdi to the gate along the southern wall of the palisade. The heavy fortifications meant to repel an Indian attack now hindered them from leaving. After a few minutes, they managed to get the gate wide open enough to slip through. The fort, which had been finished just as the storm broke, perched along the northern side of the butte, where the 3 steep slopes offered even more natural security. The southern end of the butte had been cleared of trees, but also offered a more gradual descent. "I don't think there's going to be much digging this fall," Verdi said as they walked around the base of the butte. Delaying the inevitable. LeSueur glanced over at the little white mound that had caused him so much grief. "If we're lucky, the river will be frozen thick enough for us to cross." "And then what?" "We'll climb the ridge until we reach the edge of the prairie. If we're lucky, the crows will lead us to some food." When they found the edge of the river, LeSueur had to struggle through drifts that reached his waist. After that, he used the butt of his rifle to prod at the ice. A few hundred yards upstream, the felucca sat anchored, trapped by ice. "The ice is thickest where the river is straightest," LeSueur repeated to the clock merchant. "Stay away from the bends." For 2 hours, LeSueur and Verdi climbed through snow until they reached the lip of the open prairie to the west. But there were no crows. Frustrated, LeSueur stood atop the valley, looking down at the beauty of the frozen river below. Autumn had just arrived a few days earlier. Now winter arrived almost 2 months earlier than expected. The expedition would fail from starvation or mutiny. Both men jumped when they heard a strange grunt. The rifles rose to their shoulders. "Was that a bear?" Gaston Verdi asked. "I could only hope," LeSueur admitted. With the wind blowing directly into his face, he had to squint to see anything. "Do you smell that?" "Yeah, it smells like cowshed." A strange vapor rose from the field, only to mix with the whipping snow. But as LeSueur looked to the north and south, there was no vapor. With nothing but open prairie to slow the snow and wind, LeSueur struggled through the snowpack almost chest deep as he grew closer to the noise. Another grunt came from a spot in the snow just a few yards in front of him. "Run!" LeSueur whispered to Gaston Verdi. "Go get all the others." "What is it?" Gaston asked. "Buffalo," LeSueur grinned. Chapter 82, Fort LeSueur, October 16th, 1700. "Now we are truly ready for anything winter can dish out," LeSueur thought, as the masts of the felucca came into view. The stumps of felled trees on top of the butte served as pulleys once their bark had been removed, allowing the thick hemp ropes to slide freely. With the southern slope covered in refrozen runoff, the boat ascended the butte with only the efforts of Nain's dozen miners. The other 8 men were balanced on the east and western side of the slope, lest the felucca suddenly slide off the spine and go tumbling off the side. But things had gone better than expected. As soon as the nose of the ship passed through the open gates, the Marines and workers ran up to where LeSueur supervised. "Well, it won't be a quick escape, but at least we'll be able to escape," LeSueur said with a shrug, knowing that for any of them to go home, they would need all to survive the winter, together. He'd used the threat of Indians burning the ship as a ruse to haul the ship into the fort. Gorged on buffalo meat and with the weather warming, the men had something to do instead of assassinating him. "Do you want bracings to keep the ship from leaning?" Pennicott asked. "Why not?" LeSueur said, giving the zealous boy another project. The only thing they had more in abundance than buffalo was timber for Pennicott to play with. Fort LeSueur now consisted of 6 buildings, 4 cabins, a supply cabin, and a building filled with buffalo steaks and roasts. According to Sergeant Sajon, they killed just under 400 buffalo that had been trapped in the deep snow of the blizzard. When the storm broke, the men spent a week skinning, slaughtering, and storing the beasts that had been an answer to their prayers. They would now neither freeze nor starve, nor would any of them sneak away. "If the weather keeps warming like this," Colin Nain began after catching his breath, "we could do some preliminary groundwork for the mine." "Perhaps," LeSueur nodded. "But with the speed of that last storm, I don't want anything getting lost and ruined. Let's see what a few more days brings us, Remy. Pierre," LeSueur called out to the Dupree brothers as they finished storing the ropes. "Let's go back to the bluff and make sure we didn't miss anything. Bring materials for a fire." LeSueur and the Dupree brothers crossed the Mikado River in one of the 2 canoes. With temperatures warming, the snow melt caused the river to once again flow. Once on the other side, they climbed the valley to the scene of the slaughter. The blood on the snow actually caused the drifts to warm quicker, leaving the death traps now impotent. "I don't mind drawing in a few varmints, but if we pull in wolf packs, we'll be paying the price all winter. Any extra flesh we find should be piled up and burned." "Aren't you worried about the smoke?" "There's enough wind today to dissipate it. I think we need to do this." So they spent 2 hours gathering up enough flesh to make a mound almost 3 feet high and just as round. Much to the annoyance of the angry crows, Remy doused the pile with oil before Pierre piled on dry wood. LeSueur was about to light the fire when he saw movement on the edge of the western prairie. At first, he thought it was a pair of coyotes or wolves approaching, but a moment later he realized he saw the tops of human heads. Without a word, he pointed and drew the Dupree brothers back with him behind a massive cottonwood that stood sentry on the lip of the valley. "Sioux?" Remy whispered after he took aim at the approaching figures. LeSueur shook his head. The 6 figures looked like the walking dead as they staggered forward. Even from a distance of 100 yards, LeSueur knew they were not Sioux, or even any other Indian tribe. The men had beards, but something far stranger caught his eye. All 6 had been stripped naked. The men had attempted to wrap themselves in husks, bark, and grasses, but their raw pink skin bore the teeth marks of winter weather. 2 of them wore the skin of a deer. LeSueur looked up and realized the dozen crows and 3 high-flying eagles had drawn in the men. When the men saw the pile of flesh, they ran the final few yards, dropping to their knees as they clawed into the flesh, ignoring the oil Remy had doused on it. Setting his rifle beside Pierre, LeSueur lifted his axe and stepped out. "Who are you men, and why are you here?" The men paused, terrified. One of them began to sob. Another lifted his arms to heaven. Bon Jean? One of them asked. Chapter 83, Fort LeSueur, October 16th, 1700. The balance of power has shifted, LeSueur noted as their impromptu council meeting grew tense. The arrival of 6 Canadians brought the camp's number to 27 and threw all plots into complete turmoil. These men are deserters or traitors, Sergeant Saint-Jean argued. We should shoot them. So that your EOS Marines remain in the majority. For all we know, these men stripped off their clothes after finding us just so we would show them mercy, Gaston Verdi added. I doubt their story's even true. If we take the men, Father Marius added, we will make enemies of the Sioux who wanted them dead. The Jesuits would pick our bones clean after the slaughter. Nain, LeSueur asked, do you have any thoughts on the matter? Seems almost unchristian to let them suffer at the hands of the Sioux and not invite them in. Deny them shelter, and we all but murdered them ourselves. Curious response. I can only assume Newton hired you. So are the Canadians hired by the British at Hudson Bay? Or are they really French? Pennicott? The young man appeared in the doorway. Yes, sir? Go make a fire in the middle of the yard. And take a bundle of those long metal stakes and set them in the fire, LeSueur said as he stood. You're going to torture them? Father Marius protested. What choice do I have? LeSueur shrugged. Bring me the one who claimed to know me. LeSueur left and marched over to the supply cabin. He moved a few crates and barrels until he had enough room to work. He secured a chain and manacles to the wall and then walked back to the door to watch the man he brought in. Chain him up, LeSueur said to Saint-Jean, who followed orders. He closed the door so the two could be alone. Samuel Brule. It has been a long time, hasn't it? When was the last time we met? Samuel wrinkled his brow, still struggling with his breathing. 1682, LeSueur answered. It was the season after fighting the fox, when I first brought Winona to Mackinac. Now, you are a man, and I am almost an old man. There was a rap on the door, and LeSueur answered it. He took the hot iron from Pennicott. Do you remember Winona? Please don't do this. I was just a boy. I didn't understand she was your... LeSueur felt an old pain in his knuckle bones. I'm glad you remember. It makes me want to trust you. If you knew I was here, you would have avoided a confrontation with me. It almost makes it believable. Tell me about the leader of your expedition. A man named Drummond, but he's dead. An Englishman? No, he was Scottish. What happened to him? After Governor Calieri closed down fur trading by recalling voyagers and coureur de bois, most of us at Mackinac and Madeline Island heard that the English would buy from us if we could reach James Bay on the Hudson. I traded furs at Fort Albany for the past 3 years until this man Drummond showed up with promises of 10 years' worth of riches for one trip into Sioux territory. What did he want in the Sioux territory? I don't honestly know. He had 3 other Englishmen, a Norwegian and 2 Swedes with him, and he hired 10 of us out of Fort Albany because we had a little knowledge of the Sioux. But you have knowledge of the Sioux? Brule shook his head. I lied. We all did. The money was worth the risk. Where did they catch you? We followed a stream from the western shore of Hudson Bay for more than 800 miles until we reached a place where the water flowed in 2 directions. Continental Divide. Brule nodded. The Sioux swept over us in waves. Those that weren't killed immediately were tortured until there were only 7 of us left. that was when another band of Sioux arrived, and there was an argument. This other tribe brought us south for a few days, but when the blizzard arrived, they stripped us of our clothes and sent us off to die. Do you command these survivors? No, Derek does. And who is this Derek? Francois d'Erac. He fought for France in the Battle of York Factory, but joined Drummond to earn a living. Can he be trusted? Of course he can be trusted. We all owe you our lives. I have not given any of you your lives yet, LeSueur corrected him. I will be straight with you, Samuel. I am alone in a sea of madness. This spring, I will likely be murdered by one of the men I have brought with me. I do not believe there is a single one of them I can trust. But God spared your life and brought you to me. Now I must decide what to do with you. You can trust me. I swear by Jesus you can trust me. I know, Samuel, but a lot can happen to a man in 2 decades, so I must be cautious. Very cautious. LeSueur extended the hot steak. You don't need to torture me, LeSueur. I know, but I need you to still scream. I can see your fingers and toes have frostbite. Any dead flesh will poison your blood and kill you. There are men in this camp who intend to kill me once I am no longer needed, so I need allies. Brule nodded frantically in confirmation. It would be easier to just have you killed, LeSueur said aloud. Brule began to whimper. A dead expedition leader, then to be attacked by Sioux. A bit too convenient, LeSueur decided. It reeked of Eos. Yet, in a pit of vipers, Brule was a man he knew. I need my enemies to think you men are my enemies. Is that understood? When you go back to the other Canadians, tell them our plan. You and your friends are spared until I need you to do a service. Brule controlled his blubbering. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. LeSueur, he corrected the man. Around the fort, act as if you hate my guts, understood? Brule nodded. If I can trust d'Erac, then I can leave him in charge of the Canadians until the time is right. If I can't trust him, then I will need you to lead these Canadians, understood? What are you going to do with him? Hopefully save his life. Now let's look at those toes. Samuel Brule was a convincing actor. By the time LeSueur opened the door, the stench of charred flesh hung like fog in the room, and Brule was drenched in sweat. When Sergeant Sagen dragged Francois d'Erac into the doorway, the man was already whimpering. They set him down on the spot where Samuel Brule had pissed himself, and chained him to the wall. Greetings, Monsieur d'Erac, LeSueur began. Before we get to business, I'm going to need you to tell me more about this man named Drummond. Chapter 84. Fort LeSueur, January 1701. LeSueur woke, dreaming of cannon fire from Captain Kidd's pirate ship. Slipping out from under his buffalo robe, he sat in the darkness for a few moments before he remembered where he slept. Go back to sleep, it's only the trees, Father Marius said from the other side of the room. In the dim morning light, LeSueur could see where frost had formed around the opening in the blankets covering Father Marius, but only his breath could be seen. During his stay at Fort Antoine, LeSueur had suffered through unimaginable cold, but much of that had been due to their lack of provisions. Now, despite tall piles of wood, endless supplies of food, and thick buffalo pelts, LeSueur felt as if the air itself was the breath of death. If not for the imminent danger, LeSueur would have never dreamed of leaving the comfort of his cocoon of furs. As the sun first hit the frozen trees, the shattering fibers of aspen trees in the distance woods woke him daily. Why don't you just make a lesser man take your turn? Gaston Verdi asked. That's what I would do as if I was commander. Gives me something to do, LeSueur shrugged as he added a few more layers of clothing. Then just be quick about closing the door. It will take another 2 hours before the room warms back up, Father Marius complained. LeSueur grabbed his axe and rifle and walked out of the cabin. The cold immediately entered his nostrils as he tried to pull out as if it tried pulling out his soul. So LeSueur stopped in the middle of the open yard, set down his rifle, and hacked away at a log until he'd splintered up enough wood to heat their cabin for 3 days. With his core warmed properly, he walked over to the elevated tower where a little cloud of vapor appeared from a tiny crevice in a buffalo skin blanket. "You still alive, Derek?" LeSueur asked after climbing the steps to the top of the platform. "Unfortunately," he answered. "This cold spell seems to have changed their minds. Or just delayed the inevitable. Do you think the Sioux will return in force?" LeSueur almost scoffed at the man's fear of the Sioux. The faceless menace had been the Canadians' key to Fort LeHillier, and all it took was stripping naked to convince the others of the danger. The Drummond expedition had indeed encountered the Yankton tribe at the watershed between the Red River and the Minnesota River, but after a few volleys, the party slipped south. Each day, the Drummond expedition was able to travel 30 miles, but each night, the weakest member of the herd was pierced with an arrow or vanished. By the time they reached the bend of the Minnesota River, half the expedition had been killed. When they located Fort LeHillier from Del Hutt's second-hand descriptions, D'Arac ordered his men to strip naked to invoke sympathy from the men holding the fort. It worked. Only LeSueur knew the truth, and Del Hutt's men became LeSueur's men after he spared them from certain death. The Sioux have been defending the secrets of this place for centuries before Drummond led you into a slow massacre, LeSueur said. I expect them to toy with us the same way. Francois D'Eric scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? They won't attack until morning, in force until spring. Most of the warriors are gathered east of the Mississippi, but when word reaches the war chiefs, this stack of sticks we call a fort won't matter. As soon as the thaw arrives, things will happen quickly. The cold turned the moisture in the trees to ice that expanded until the fibers of the trunk could no longer hold and shattered the wood to splinters. In the same way, the Order of Eos splintered from the pressure. Although the Lemoyne family had sent Sergeant Sajon and the Marines, Del Hutt moved independently, hiring the Drummond expedition to blindly wander into Sioux territory from the north. Under torture, D'Eric told LeSueur as much. While the truth of the expedition died with Drummond, Francois D'Eric confessed to being a spy and potential thief, even though he knew little of the treasure found at Fort LeHillier. Had Samuel Brule not been part of the expedition, LeSueur might have closed the doors to them. Sometimes mercy can appear cruel. Sparing your lives is only for my self-preservation. How are your wounds? My feet are better than my hands. Gun appears to need more treatment. His ears? No, but they've healed. But I think you might have to take his left toes. They've swollen again. Better to risk a few toes than face certain death from the Sioux or winter. I'll need all of you come spring. Tell him I'll come and visit him when my watch is over. If any of us survive until spring, D'Eric muttered, and climbed down from his watch near the gate. Even when the sun rose above the eastern lip of the valley, it gave LeSueur little warmth. He kept his eyes to the east, knowing if an attack would come, it would come from that direction. Shortly before noon, LeSueur spotted movement along the northern slope coming from the Minnesota River. By the time he stopped ringing the alarm bell, all 26 men were armed and ready. Sioux? Sergeant Sajon said from beside him on the elevated platform. Yes, but they don't appear to belong to Chief Waukesha. Is that good or bad? Good, LeSueur said. This is as good as we could have hoped for. Not much of an imposing force, Sejan noted of the 24 heavily wrapped bodies that walked slowly to the fort. Old men, probably. They don't see us as enough of a threat to send warriors. I think they want to talk. So LeSueur climbed down from the platform, grabbed his axe, and exited the gate to greet the Sioux by himself. I don't know how to speak Sioux. One of the men said, and then fell down on his knees. As LeSueur tried to figure out what they said, the others also fell down on their knees in a strange sign of submission. Behind him, he felt both eyes and gun barrels looking down at him. His position as leader of the expedition was given to him because of the threat the mighty Sioux nation posed to their endeavor, but seeing a dozen grieving old men almost angered LeSueur. Pity? They are asking for me to have pity? Taku inseyapi he? LeSueur asked. The sobbing ceased for a moment. I am Red Owl of the Sisseton. I have come from Swan Lake to warn you that you are in danger. The old man had his face painted entirely black. We have come in peace. In fact, we have much food and French goods to trade with you. I am the Bearman of the French. I have been welcomed in the home of Teoscate of Spirit Island and Waukesha along the Mississippi, and I hope to be friends with the Oceti-Sakowin at this place also. We still grieve for Teoscate, who died in the east, and Waukesha has gone mad with vengeance. You are no friend of the Oceti-Sakowin. You will bring darkness to our lands. LeSueur turned, knowing that none of the men in the fort understood a word he was speaking. I am only the beginning of things to come. I am a friend of the Oceti-Sakowin, but I am surrounded by men who mean to rob you of your most precious treasure. Treasure? There is no treasure here but evil, which is why we risked the lives of old men whose days are already spent. What do you want from me? Depart from here, all you who do evil, for the Great Spirit has heard my weeping. Tear down this fort and leave before all of us are killed. Why would Red Owl of the Sisseton be afraid? We mean you no harm. We have come to collect beater pelts, that is all. We have lied to our brothers, and when they learn of our treachery, we will be destroyed, along with all of you inside of the fort. If you are only seeking fur, then we will give you a new home along the Mendota. But if you stay here, when the Metawakitan or Teton return, we will be blamed for letting you enter these lands. Red Owl wanted them to move several miles north to where the Mikado had met Minnesota, but LeSueur knew he couldn't, despite the risks. Winter is upon us, and I cannot risk the lives of my men. The lives of your men? Is it better that 26 men should die in order to save the lives of a nation? Or is it better that a single nation should die in order to save all the nations of the world? Red Owl rose from the ground and walked over to LeSueur. He reached out a hand and touched the side of his face to study him closely. There are some amongst the arrowheads of the Oceti-Sakowin who believe the Wishwe has come to wage war against No Soul. It is said that the Wishwe will have a strange light in his eyes, but I see no such light in your eyes. You look like a normal man, and if that is the case, I worry that you will only wake the evil spirit that slumbers. Do not wake the evil spirit if you are not prepared to kill it. And with that, the Sisseton Sioux rose and turned back to their homes to the north. Chapter 85, Fort LeSueur, April 1701. Did LaSalle know the end was near? LeSueur woke from his dreams of a mutiny. He imagined himself stuck in a swamp of blue mud while birds swept in to tear chunks of his flesh as they slowly devoured him alive. Is today the day I die? After hastily dressing for the day, LeSueur walked out to the ramparts of Fort LeSueur to inspect the ticking bomb that was his camp. The mine grew deeper by the minute. Even before the drifts melted, Colonnade and his miners made the blue mound vanish in a day. Then a hole replaced it, and then a deep pit. Now LeSueur looked down from the observation stand as the miners unearthed tons of ore, none of which was true copper. Beside him, Francois de Eric waited for his orders. Perhaps all is not lost, LeSueur decided. The Sioux know about us, so there is no way we can return the way we came. But the Makato begins south of here. The Moingana River begins west of here, but we found its mouth hundreds of miles to the southwest. That should bring us to Iowa territory. Iowa? Derek questioned. A tribe that showed mercy in my last dealings with them, and they might be the closest thing to an ally we have. If we cannot escape through Sioux territory, we might as well use the Moingana River to flee to the south. Is that why you have Pennicott making those barges? LeSueur smiled at the irony. I've been trapped in my own web. If I don't continue to dance this dance, the men will mutiny when they find out the blue mud is worthless. So they sort the blue mud into a pile. For what purpose? I'll have to start shipping it down the river to Lemoyne. Unless we're all murdered by those Teton Sioux. Most likely the Metawakitan, LeSueur teased. Your point is taken, but anyone I send on the barges will believe it to be safer than remaining here. I need you to start preparing for the worst. I can take my men south up the Makato, and then portage until I find your Ioways. It would at least give us something to do. Francois de Eric almost ran down the stairs. That will do. LeSueur walked across the elevated plank system built along the top of the palisade. He looked down the steep western slope to where Pennicott hammered away at the wooden barges. With a sharp whistle, he drew the boys' attention. How soon until we can start loading those? Any day, sir. I'm just making sure they are sturdy enough to get all the way to Fort Maurepas. How much can each of those hold? Quite a bit, sir. At least a few tons of copper. LeSueur stood alone on the ramparts. On the southeast side of the fort, the excavation had torn open the grassy field. A new mound of blue earth had been created near the base of the butte from the plume and the material underneath it. If de Eric finds a route south, perhaps I could steal the treasure and escape with Del Hutt's Canadians? I could survive 6 men, but not 20, or an angry nation of Sioux. By noon, Derek had vanished, leaving LeSueur alone along the watchtower. Below, he could smell the lunch being cooked by the Dupree brothers, who had managed to shoot 3 turkeys the previous day. Then a shout came up from the pit. We found something, Colonnade shouted out from the fort, from his spot below the excavation scaffolding over the pit. Come and see. Sacre bleu. LeSueur all but jumped off the watchtower, stumbling awkwardly when his legs did not provide the spring they once did in his youth. They found something, LeSueur said to the Dupree brothers, who were roasting one of the big birds over the spit. Found what? Gaston Verdi asked from the doorway of his cabin. I have no idea, but now Nain sounds excited. LeSueur threw open the gate and ran as fast as his legs could carry him down the staircase that led down to the work area. By the time he reached the pit, most of the men had gathered around to peer over. He pushed past Father Marius and Sergeant Sagen until he found Colonnade. What is it? LeSueur asked, breathing heavily. Some sort of stone chest. A stone chest? LeSueur asked, looking down into the hole. What would a stone chest be doing 30 feet below the surface? He must have found bedrock. Orel, tell LeSueur what you found, Nain shouted back down the wood-lined shaft. Below, Orel wiped the mud from his brow. It's about 3 foot across, but it's too uniform not to be man-made. Will this scaffolding support me? LeSueur asked Nain. Of course. Without explanation, LeSueur grabbed hold of one of the buckets and swung over the pit. Then lower me down so I can see what these fools are talking about. As he descended, he could see all the faces bend to look down upon him. Moisture leaked through the timbers, meant to keep the soft earth from collapsing on them. Nain's miners openly complained about the dangers of the pit, having expected to be burrowing into hard stone instead of the soft sediment of the valley floor. Descending the pit for the first time, and feeling the moist walls close in, he understood the trepidation of the miners. "I hear you found something," LeSueur said, as Aurel and Lorenz met him in the muddy earth at the bottom of the pit. "We did. It's very strange," Aurel said, and took his covered light and set it down near the base of the pit. It was a stone box, cracked along its side and leaking blue vitriol. "Do you see why we called for help?" Lorenz asked. "I do," LeSueur admitted, and picked up one of the metal mallets beside the pickaxes. He hoisted the heavy tool onto his shoulder and motioned for the two to step back. The pit only had a base of about 7 feet, so LeSueur double-checked they were out of striking distance before he swung. The first blow caused the flat stone to shift an inch along the fissure, but with a second blow, a second crack appeared, and by the third blow, the side caved in and a gush of blue vitriol followed. The top stone slab stayed but the exposed side revealed the wall to be only 3 inches thick. LeSueur knelt down and pressed his fingers into the space created by the mallet. "Help me pull it open," LeSueur said, and Aurel knelt down by his side. They say the Ark of the Covenant was covered in casing stones like this," Aurel said with a smile. "I doubt this is the lost Ark," LeSueur smiled. "Ready?" Together, they pivoted the stone shard until it turned and came twisting out of the cavity, landing awkwardly against LeSueur's feet and ankles. "Are you okay?" But before LeSueur could even check, a noise came from above them. Then a body came crashing down upon Lorenz, snapping his neck and killing him instantly. Both Aurel and LeSueur leaned back against the wall and looked up. Another gunshot soon followed, and all the heads that had been looking down vanished. "What's going on?" LeSueur shouted, but no answer came. It's Sejan," Aurel muttered. "He's been shot through the head." It was true. A small wound on the back of his head revealed where the bullet had entered before tearing away most of Sejan's forehead. But who fired the shot? Or the second shot? Men were fighting near the opening of the pit. "Are you okay down there?" Colin Nain suddenly appeared over the edge. "Lorenz is dead," LeSueur shouted back up. "So is Sejan. Father Marius shot him in the head before any of us knew what was happening. Then Father Marius was killed before we could even question him." "Get me out of this hole," Aurel shouted back up. But then another shot filled the air, followed closely by 2 more. "Hey!" LeSueur shouted. "What is happening?" But only more gunfire answered, 3 shots at a time. "Please don't kill me," Aurel muttered, and moved away from LeSueur. "I'm not the one you need to fear," LeSueur admitted, and both men looked up for the slaughter to come to an end. Chapter 86, Fort LeSueur, April 1701. The next morning, a head leaned over the pit and quickly withdrew. It was too fast for LeSueur to discern any details, but having reviewed the sounds of horror in his mind all night, he pretty much knew who it was. He nudged Aurel. "It's time." Time to die? Time to escape? LeSueur did not know. 2 pistols peeked over the edge of the pit, followed by the faces of the Dupree brothers. But Gaston Verdi spoke. "Who's still alive down there?" "Aurel and myself." "What about d'Eric and Lorenz?" "Lorenz is dead from a broken neck. I have no idea about d'Eric." LeSueur had acted too late. The best d'Eric could hope for was to just keep running and never look back. We're going to lower a new bucket for the treasure. We want you to put it in the bucket so we can haul it out of the hole. Why don't you come down here and do it for yourself? Gaston Verdi paused for a moment. I've already given thought to doing just that, but we've lost too many lives already. I prefer not to kill you at this time, but all I need to do is drop rocks down to you and Aurel. I was hoping you could cooperate. Aurel looked down at his bloodied hands, and then to LeSueur. Don't touch it, it's cursed. Muttering curses under his breath, LeSueur ripped and tugged until Matthew Saint-Jean's shirt was free. Then he wrapped his hands with the shirt until he had mitts. With grit teeth, he shook his head as they watched the oversized bucket get lowered back down. Let him have it, LeSueur said. It's the only way out of the pit. LeSueur glanced over at the egg-shaped object sitting atop the flat casing stone. He approached it as if he was a coiled snake ready to strike and tossed the shirt over it. Then, his hands wrapped around it delicately as if lifting a newborn. What kind of sorcery is this? LeSueur asked. It's already warm. Then let me do it, Aurel said. My hands are already ruined. LeSueur stepped aside and Aurel stared at his nemesis. The previous day, as the sound of gunfire was replaced by screams of torture, Aurel had finished extracting the treasure. In a gush of blue vitriol, a smooth, egg-shaped stone had come rolling out of the stone womb. Aurel had been so excited that he scooped it up from the mud, only for the flesh of his hands to stick to the stone like a child's tongue upon a frosty metal pole. The skin that sloughed off his hands remained on the white stone for a few moments before dissolving away and vanishing. Aurel readied his chafed, bloodied hands and in one quick motion swept the dense stone from the top of the stone box and into the bucket. Haul it up, LeSueur said as he glanced at where Aurel's shirt had been burned. Step back, that thing might burn right through the bucket and kill us where it falls. He and Aurel stepped back and watched as the bucket rose to the surface. Now what? Aurel asked. Will they just leave us down here to die? I would, LeSueur shrugged. Why waste a bullet on us? A few hours later, when faces again peered over the pit, LeSueur lowered his head, expecting the worst. We need LeSueur. Aurel almost wept. I'll come back for you, I promise. When the bucket dropped over the floor of the pit, LeSueur stepped into it and wrapped his elbow and forearm around the rope. Ready. Just like the earth had given unholy birth to the Philosopher's Stone the previous day, the same pit gave him new life as he emerged to a cloudy, misty April day. Pierre and Remy Dupree warily pointed their pistols at LeSueur. Keeping your gunpowder dry, boys? LeSueur mocked, but then out of the corner of his eyes he saw Gaston Verdi with a sword pointed at him. We need you to put these shackles on, Verdi commanded. But when LeSueur looked down, the stacks of bodies distracted him. Father Gabriel Marius with a gunshot to his chest. LeSueur always questioned whether the man was even a priest, but either way, he intended to sabotage the mission at the brink of success. But he hadn't counted on Gaston Verdi. Beside Father Marius, the three Marines, Leon, Louis, and Michael, were lined up like stacked logs, all shot from rifles. The three marksmen had started with the Marines from their spot upon the fort wall. 3 Canadians also lie dead, along with Esquino and Gasquet. The arrival of the 6 Canadian trappers had obviously troubled Verdi for more reasons than license violations. A wounded Colonnane was tied up and lying face down on the ground with 5 dead miners lined up between him and the pit. Inventory, LeSueur realized. Gaston Verdi took inventory after all of the killing was done. Including Lawrence, there were 13 slain men on the valley floor. No soul had already festered upon the blood of his first offering. Now what? LeSueur said after he showed Verdi his shackled hands. I suppose you want me to explain why you have blistered hands? Verdi held a sword, but his hands were wrapped in linen. So that's what you've been reading about all this time. Back in the fort, LeSueur found the other survivors, guarded over by Andre Pennicott, tied and chained in the center of the compound. Gallard, one of the miners, wept in a spot by himself, his hands bloodied, but not from picking up the philosopher's stone. His fingernails were pulled out. Pennicott, Verdi called out, quit your whittling and bring Fournette back with the others. Andre Pennicott set down his knife and wood and picked up his pistol. The young man jogged past LeSueur and opened the door to the Marine's cabin, where Leon Fournette sat in a pool of his own blood and urine. Fournette's fingernails were also removed. Do you serve the prophecy, or do you prevent it? Pennicott looked at LeSueur with apologetic eyes, but nevertheless followed orders. The 3 hunters did not allow LeSueur an opening for attack or escape, and soon he was secured to the floor on the same spot Fournette had just been. Across the room, sitting on the table, was the pale white stone. Is this what I think it is? Gaston Verdi finally asked. I find it hard to believe that you don't know, especially all the reading you've done. Where were your puppet masters? What were your puppet masters going to do with it? I was to secure the treasure, if found, and bring it back at all costs. All costs? Tell me what you know, and I'll tell you what I know. I'll save you the efforts of having to rip out my fingernails. What I know? In a sane world, this thing shouldn't exist, but there it is. But after all this time, I've never been able to figure out if your loyalty lies with the Jesuits, the Order of Eos, the Periphery, or the Priory of Ormus. Your motivation was always clear, brother-in-law, but your loyalty remained clouded. Let's start with that. Who are you loyal to? Myself, LeSueur said with a grin. I couldn't be loyal to the name LeSueur when my own family sent me across the Atlantic. How could I be loyal to the Jesuits when all they wanted me for was my brain, and later, my brawn? Perrault? He only wanted to add money to his pockets. The Lemoyne family? They threw their youngest cousin at me to get my answers about this place. The Order of Eos? I don't care about them. I guess stubborn curiosity brought me all this way. I'm only loyal to myself, so why don't you tell me your loyalty? Who's your master? Fair enough. I was hired by King Louis almost 30 years ago to investigate a strange conspiracy. A spy? No, a fly, as we were called. Flies on the wall in service to the king. Secret societies and occult organizations troubled King Louis, so he used the resources of his kingdom to recruit a secret police force. Which makes King Louis Lord of the Flies, is that it? Gaston Verdi laughed. No, we are not that sinister. King Louis is just mostly curious. So he sends his flies wherever something stinks to discover the heart of the matter. The lore about the Philosopher's Stone and an Undine region has been known for quite a while. Now that we've arrived at this place and time, I need you to tell me what you know. That thing sitting on the table over there is indeed the Philosopher's Stone. What it is doing way the hell out here is beyond me, LeSueur admitted. But I do know men have been searching for it for a very, very long time. Yes, I've tortured enough men over the years to know the history of this quest. I need to know why they are searching for it. Despite the heat coming from the stove, LeSueur felt a chill come over him. He could not answer this question. I've been courted by both sides, so it depends on which side you ask. Come on, LeSueur, you can do better than that. You must be of some value to me. Tell me why they are willing to move mountains to acquire this. It is God incarnate. LeSueur bluffed and prepared to spin a lie. What is that supposed to mean? The Sioux believed that the world was formed by a rock named Inyan. From this creator deity, all things, from humans to the universe, were made from it until hardly anything was left but this stone. Yet this small stone holds the designs for everything in the universe. To harness this would be harnessing the power of creation. So the alchemists, with their belief that this could turn objects into gold, are only beginning to scratch at the surface of what this thing could do. And the periphery and Jesuits, what do they want with it? If they won control, they would be able to continue to make God into man's image, LeSueur added. Interesting, Gaston Verdi answered. That is quite a tale. We'll see if your story stays the same after a few more days. Before we really get to know each other, tell me more about these men you brought with you. Chapter 87, Land of the Blue Woman, April 1701. For Samuel Brule, the Blue Earth River offered a chance to find civilization again. Although hired by Francois d'Eric, but now commanded by Pierre-Charles LeSueur, he knew that each stroke of his paddle brought him closer to the settlements and trading posts being built to the south, and freedom. His dreams of freedom ended when Derek raised his hand in the prow of the canoe and whispered, "Quiet." At the sight of the first native, Brule hastily set down his paddle in order to retrieve a rifle. But by the time he held it in his hands, a dozen more natives came out of the woods to intercept the canoes. Although Sioux, the tribe was different from the others they'd met. The truth of the matter became obvious when men on horses came riding down the riverbank and right into the river. The younger men from the trees walked out into the river and pulled the trespassers from their canoes, binding their hands with leather straps. The whole while, Francis d'Eric first tried to explain himself in French, and then in Cree, and finally in a few Iowa words given to him by LeSueur. None of it worked. The 24 Teton made their captives jog between the horses as they steadily headed east through the tall prairie grass. Brule contemplated throwing himself into the grass and hastily crawling away, but the thought of arrows or spears in his back kept him from being so foolish. They could have killed us all in the river, he told himself. Dusk arrived without reaching a destination, although in the last 10 minutes of sun, he could see a ring of trees rising from the flat earth. A lake or river, he decided, knowing that only wetlands could resist prairie fires. It was a long, skinny lake, and after seeing its western shore, they went around to its northern tip, where another dozen riders met them, joining them for the final leg back down its eastern shore. The light of the small camp caught Brule's eyes. Children came running out to inspect the prisoners, and a camp of almost 100 men, women, and children gathered to inspect the foreigners. Finally, they were brought to the center of the camp, a small hill overlooking the lake and nearby island. 3 posts were sunk into the ground, and the captives were tied while sitting down with their backs to the posts. Neither violence nor interrogation was offered to them as the sun slowly set across the western horizon. For Brule, his position offered a glimpse of the sunset, perhaps his final. It also allowed him a solitary view of a solitary figure coming from the small island. The slender figure waded through knee-deep water between the island and the shore, her hands skimming the water's surface before her eyes focused on the prisoners. Samuel Brule lowered his head, for the face of death was both beautiful and familiar. Like a coward, he looked at his knees until he heard footsteps approach, followed by a voice that spoke French. "Hello, Samuel. What have you brought to trade?" He looked up at Winona. "Only my life." Chapter 88, Fort LeSueur, April 1701. The full moon kept LeSueur company during the long night. Through torture and bondage, his legendary strength was rendered useless. Yet he did all he could to keep his chin off his chest. With a clear sky overhead, the April temperatures dipped near freezing, bringing his battered body a numbing kiss. His hands were tied behind a post, and his wrists and ankles were chained with shackles brought all the way from across the world from La Rochelle. But it was another import from the port city that proved most interesting. The Jesuit plot died with Father Marius. From the torture of Colin Nain earlier that evening, he heard all about the Priory of Ormus and the English plot to acquire the stone. The 2-pronged plot from the Order of Eos had also been stopped, since all the men hired by the Lemoynes were dead, and Delhut's Canadians were also killed or currently in Iowa. Only men hired by King Louis remained under the command of torturer Gaston Verdi. Any kinship found in marriage to the Messier sisters had been a ruse for the spy to infiltrate the rising aristocratic family. LeSueur confessed all his information during the first round of torture, which kept him alive as Verdi sorted through the rest of the men. Remy Dupree kept watch on the ramparts, his hunting rifle looking down on the haunted valley and the pit where Aurel slowly died a wet death. The wood creaked as he routinely shifted from one wall to the other. Yet during Dupree's vigil on the western wall, overlooking the confluence of the Yoncalo and Makato rivers, LeSueur heard first the creak of wood along the eastern steps, and then silence. Time could only be measured by watching the stars and moon shift overhead, but in steady 15-minute increments, Dupree returned to the eastern wall, where eventually the shadow in the stairs caught him off guard and smothered him with hand and knife. And then silence for a few minutes. Feet descended the stairs, then the slight sound of swinging door hinges, followed by footsteps that came closer. A familiar shadow stood in front of him, whispering, "What is the old saying? My enemy is my friend? I cannot complete this mission alone, and you're the only one left that Dubois trusted. I can trust you, right?" The carpenter, Andre Pennicott, stood with a bloody knife in one hand and the smoldering philosopher's stone tucked under his arm. "We need to get the hell away from here and then throw this miserable thing back into the depths where it belongs." The periphery. The final plot revealed itself, but too late. "If you want to live, sit down," LeSueur said, trying to peer past Pennicott. "You don't understand. I can't in good measure leave you here to be tortured to death, and I'll need help if I am to hide this. I'm offering you your freedom, LeSueur." "And I'm offering your life," he said. The shuffle of moccasin upon wooden timbers now came from all sides. Quickly, sit down like you are a prisoner and you might survive." Pennicott saw the shadows of the haunted valley come alive. With a dull thud, a warm object settled near LeSueur, and then he felt Pennicott slide up beside him on the other side of the post. The shadows were swift and quick, and soon the doors of the fort swung open to invite in all the darkness. There was no thunder of hooves or taunting chants to christen the battle, and like the chill of deep night, it slowly strangled the entire fort. When the cry of "to arms" was shouted, followed by the thunderous discharge of a pistol, a chorus of Lakota war cries echoed in response. And then a second slaughter soaked the haunted valley with blood. Chapter 89. The Haunted Valley, April 1701. Chief Keoksa of the Metawakiton held his war hammer across his lap as his young warriors vigorously paddled into the spring current of the Mikado River. A handful of other canoes raced ahead, but the bulk of his war party trailed behind. The canoes of Red Owl Sisseton could not keep up with his veteran warriors, and even the foot warriors on both sides of the river could not keep up with his men. "I can't wait for them to catch up with me," he thought as his eyes fixed to the line of smoke to the south. "I might already be too late." Unlike the wider Minnesota, the Blue Earth River had a narrow valley with limited visibility as they approached the haunted valley. A few isolated bluffs hid the source of the smoke, although flames danced above the leafless cottonwoods. "Evil is already rising from the depths of the earth," Keoksa worried. "I have failed." A half-mile from the blasphemous fort, the river straightened, allowing him to see the flames ahead. Screams of killer and victim filled the air, and all around the bluff, unholy figures moved along the silhouettes of the palisade. Who are these men? Why are there so many? He turned around, glancing at the rest of his men and the slower Sisseton canoes. Our attack is spread out. We'll be jumping into the fray blindly. Keoksa lowered his head to pray. "O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me, I need your strength and vision." Soon his eyes could see the burning fort on top of the bluff, and at its base, the confluence of two rivers. When his canoe struck the soft mud, he raced past his own men to scale the steep hill. As he scrambled up the steep slope, he could hear voices amid the din of battle. Lakota voices? It was impossible. From the bend of the river, the three-pronged attack began simultaneously, with his men canoeing up the river, the Sisseton attacking on foot from the west bank, and the Wapakudi sweeping in from the east. None of them could have arrived faster than we did. A shout came from the top of the bluff. "Enemies! By the river!" An arrow whizzed by his head. Madness. "We are friends," he shouted out. "Do not shoot." His cry did not stop the arrows. Lakota arrows. "I am Chief Keoksa, a dweller of Spirit Lake. Do not fire another arrow or your people will feel my wrath." The arrows stopped just as he stepped out of the brush and into the level, open ground in front of the palisade. His men gathered at his side, all staring up at the shadowy figures along the top of the wall. "I am Touch the Trees of the Prairie Dwellers. What is your purpose here?" "The Lakota? Here?" "I am a guardian of the frontier. To enter the haunted valley bears the penalty of death," Keoksa barked while signaling to his men to withhold the attack. With each heartbeat, more Lakota warriors emerged from the fort, neutralizing each of his own men that arrived. Touch the Trees leaned over the palisade. "If you had done your duty, we would not need to be here, son of Waukesha." "He knows me?" "Perhaps I wrestled with him once at Pipestone." Dozens of arrows were notched and bows bent as the standstill waited on the command of two leaders. "We have come to kill the white men who built this fort on sacred grounds." "You've come too late. We've killed all the men here. Go back to the north and defend our people from the Chippewa." "Who commands you? What band of Lakota are you?" We are the Blackfeet Lakota of Bear Mountain. We were on sacred pilgrimage to harvest the crooked roots of the water lily when we found white men passing freely through the lands of our 7 council fires. Winona. With each passing moment, more men gathered at the bottom of the palisade, strengthening Keox's authority and resolve. It is the shame of the Sisseton that these men were allowed to build this fort, and the shame of the Warpacuti for allowing them to pass through their lands undiscovered. When I heard of white men in the heart of the Haunted Valley, I came immediately, and I will soon be joined by Chief Red Owl, who will verify this story. For doing your duty, you have honored all the men of the 7 councils' fire. Who commands you? The answer did not come quickly, but a moment later, the heavy doors of the palisade gate shivered and then swung open. 3 figures stood in the doorway. I am Chief White Raven, the thin warrior said, but Keoxa paid him little mind. Hello, brother, Winona said, a figure from a distant dream. Seeing his sister did not cause his knees to buckle. It was seeing a ghost step out of the underworld. Keoxa pointed his battle axe at the 3rd figure, who loomed behind the other 2. Why won't death take you? Chapter 90, Land of Memories, 1701. For generations, a floodplain at the confluence of the Blue Earth and Minnesota rivers served as a meeting place for the tribes of the 7 councils' fires. To the north, the steep bank that formed the bend of the river towered over the site. To the west and east, the ancient bank sloped more gently, yet still served as visual walls for the campground, where hundreds of teepees stood upon the soft sediment of the little valley. Winona heard the commotion from the north side of the camp, where the Metawakitan camped alongside the river. White Raven already sat up in his bed upon his elbows listening. Your father has arrived. I should have freed Bear Man while we had the chance, she said. Have I doomed him to the flames of a pyre? Trust in Inyan, White Raven told her. I will make sure your voice is heard at council, and once you have explained yourself, even your stubborn father will see the truth. I am worried more about my brother, she admitted, slipping into her elk-tooth dress before stepping out into the morning air. The Blackfoot Lakota camped along the extreme southern edge of Land of Memories, with distinctive teepees of the 5 lodges forming a fence for their horses. The Blackfoot boys, camped outside to guard the horses, waved at her as she stepped out. She nodded and turned toward the river. She quickly refreshed herself in the cool water that flowed out of the haunted valley several miles to the south. They had camped in the shadows of the exposed granite that marked the border between the 2 landmarks. White Raven insisted on the protection of the ancient stone for both spiritual and strategic reasons. When she finished, she saw her husband's men already gathered. Her husband and his men wore clothing that identified their home ranging from the Black Hills and the Tetons. From the Tetons, the dyed pelts of the mountain goat rested upon their broad shoulders. From the hills surrounding that scratched the slopes of Bear Mountain, the distinctive teeth of elk jangled upon their deerskin clothing. To signify the Black Hills, their feet had been stained black since childhood. For her husband, his headdress of white raven feathers not only made him the tallest of the warriors, but signified his sacred right to enter the holiest of peaks within the Black Hills. She loved them all, and each one would die for me today. I must be measured. White Raven already held his ancestral arrow, which would join the other chieftains gathered at the Land of Memories. Although not all of the 49 chieftains had gathered, a quick decision needed to be made, and representatives from each of the 7 regions had come, and her father presided over all. I'm going to speak with Bearman so he understands what will happen today, she said to her husband. Glancing down, she saw her parfleche box. Already the happy blue and white geometrical pattern had been stained the color of mud, and the leather tassels along the borders of the box had twisted and darkened like sinew. Underneath it, freshly cut poles would be lifted to accompany her husband. "Are you taking it to my father?" "Not yet. I'll go meet with your father first and explain what is going to happen." "He will still see you as a boy," Winona said. "You should let Red Trout speak for the Lakota. He is your elder. In matters of war, yes. But in spiritual matters, I represent both the Blackfoot and the 5 Lodges. He must be made to understand what is happening. To my father, all that matters are matters of war. Bring Red Trout with you. Let him stand at your side. If it helps, I will do that." She quickly turned to her husband's lieutenant, touched the trees, to say, "Be on your guard. You saw the bloodshed and carnage at the fort. The white egg could do the same things to the hearts of the men gathered here. We will need you to be ready in a moment's notice to attack or flee. Even though I cannot see him, I feel the presence of no soul. I will be watchful." She touched his cheek and then stepped into the tepee. She found the bundle she'd collected at the fort and picked it up, along with the axe, even though she couldn't be sure who it belonged to. It must do. Next, she walked away to the edge of the camp, where she found her 2 oldest sons guarding the prisoners, with a mixture of Blackfoot and Metawakitan guards. And placed upon the campgrounds of the Sisseton, the open-air prison revealed one of the 3 groups whose lives still hung in the balance. Her cruel brother had a group in the northern part of the campground, and the Warpacuti had been given the east-central part. As soon as she approached, the boys who guarded it quickly stood up. The prisoners, seeing this, managed only to sit up, bound by wet leather lashings to spikes that would hold back a wild grizzly. "My father has arrived," she said to LeSueur, who yawned, still on his back. "Will they burn me alive?" he asked. "White Raven will not allow it. We would become outcasts before allowing it." "So what's going to happen now?" "You need to put these on," she said, pushing the package through the visual barrier of posts surrounding them. "I'm going to present you as a war chief of the French at the council. You must look the part instead of smelling like a slave." She looked down at the package, which revealed some of his finest clothing. "Will I be allowed an axe?" "The other chieftains bring an arrow to council. You will bring your own weapon," Winona explained, and then turned to the guards, including her son. "He is to be released." Her eldest, Rattling Grass, immediately flashed a blade, cut into the fenced area, and then LeSueur's tethers at the post, leaving the other young white man to ask questions. Bearman answered in French, letting the spy known as Pennicott know what was happening and why he was being left behind. Now past 40, Bearman winced and grit his teeth as he stretched. The marks of torture now covered him, both from what Kiaksa had done winters ago and from what his own crew did to him right up until his liberation. While Bearman changed clothing, boys from the other bands ran off to tell the others what was happening. But it no longer mattered to Winona what the others thought. She had to do what was right. Charging Bear, her younger son, stared up in awe at the giant, bringing a smile to Winona's face. "I shouldn't have brought him on the pilgrimage," she told herself, but when they left several weeks earlier, it was only a trek to a sacred lake. "Now, I want both of you to go help touch the trees. Listen to what he says." Her sons were hesitant, but followed. "Beauty and wrath," Bearman muttered. "I understand why they fear you." "It has been 19 years since the Serpent Star appeared. Many of the men gathered will not remember. My brother will want to make an example of you to show his mettle. My father will want your death to atone for your entry into the Haunted Valley. I will explain to them all that you are the Wishwe, and it is your sacred right to be here. But I'm not the Wishwe. You are the Wishwe. You must be. When my father refused to listen to me and sent me away with the Lakota, I wanted to take my life. But in my dreams, the great mystery spoke to me, telling me that my journey was not over. Since then, I have learned much more about the Serpent Star and the prophecy surrounding it. For your part, you have brought the white egg to the surface, and for the sake of my people, you will guide us in counsel. If you claim that I am the Wishwe, they will kill me and then kill you. If you do not claim it, there will be much bloodshed here today. This will destroy the 7 council fires. So, you are the Wishwe. She handed him the axe. Together, they walked the half-mile of open field until they came to the shadow of the big cottonwood trees that fringed the river. Curses, whispers, insults, and even cries of alarm came as she led the big Frenchman into the camp. She saw White Raven already there, with Red Trout beside him. 24 arrows rested in front of the feet of the 24 chiefs. She guided Bear Man to the protection of her husband, whose arrow rested in front of where he sat opposite of her father, Waukesha. Across the circle yard, her aging father looked up, his arms crossed and his jaws set. It surprised her how small he looked. Winona flinched from the sudden movement and heavy thud. As instructed, Bear Man swung his heavy axe, sinking into the ground in front of where he took a seat. I am Beanpole, adopted son of Jacques Marquette. I am Bear Man, bane of the fox. I am Paul Bonjean, the fur trading partner to Winona. I am Pierre-Charles LeSueur, commander of the armies of the French. But I am also Wishwe, sent by the Serpent Star. Hours of chaos ensued, and the life and story of Bear Man was told to all who sat around the council. Several people had parts to tell in the tale, including her father and brother, who spoke true, but it was Winona's testimony that further agitated the crowd. Much of the questioning centered around how the French expedition entered the territory, and questions about the paranormal were ignored. When supper was brought to the chiefs, Winona knew it was time to focus their attention. During the silence of eating, Touch the Trees and 3 other men carried her parfleche box to the middle of the yard and set it there. The geometric patterns were barely visible, leaving the hide even darker than it had been in the previous morning. It knows. Now her husband explained. When the 7 council fires first climbed upon the back of the great turtle, we were given a sacred duty. We returned to the place where the world was created, discovering our sacred places told to us in stories. I live in the shadow of Bear Lodge, which served as a center for our people, a north star for the tribes to find the other sacred places. For countless generations, our people have protected the heart of the great turtle. In the west, the Lakota have protected the Black Hills, the womb of the earth. In the east, the dwellers of Spirit Lake have performed a sacred duty, guarding the frontier from many enemies. Since our people spread out over the lands, our people have maintained the same traditions, but a sign in the stars has brought a change to our sacred duty. The crowd did not like White Raven's words, having heard Winona mention the Serpent Star earlier. Each day of my life, I wake up and gaze upon Bear Mountain, and I can see the claw marks upon the mountain, a reminder of the power of the great bear, No Soul. We guard Spirit Lake, Keoksa shouted. Do not remind us about our duty. I forgive you your bitter words, for I know it is the spirit of No Soul tainting your heart. I respect the ways of the dwellers of Spirit Lake, but the spirit of No Soul is awake. With the arrival of the Serpent Star, No Soul stirred inside of his cave, knowing his time draws near. The only way No Soul can be defeated is by Wishwe, wielder of the white egg, which I lay before the council. The white egg has been unearthed? Waukesha asked. White Raven nodded. It has been found by the Wishwe, the one sent by the Serpent Star. Your daughter knew the truth, and you sent her away to silence her. Now our enemies grow stronger, and if we do not acknowledge the divine truth, our mighty nation will grow sick and die. We must ask the advice of the one sent to us." Kiaxa shouted back, "This man is not sent by the stars. He's a dirty Frenchman, unworthy to even sit here with us." "I know this man once saved my daughter," Waukesha added, "but how can you know he is the Wishwe? Why would we not see him as a thief? Why should we not see him as a thief?" "Let me show you," White Raven said, and after respectfully waiting for Waukesha's nod, he rose and walked to the stained parfleche. He knelt beside the leather box, placing his hands upon it. "If you will not believe me that he is the Wishwe, then let me prove to you the reality of the white egg." White Raven pressed upon the top of the parfleche, and after just a few moments his hand snapped away, the leather consumed by a flame that came from within. Many of the chieftains muttered and gasped, especially when the whole box combusted in front of them. "Tricks," Waukesha shouted out. "You had hot coals inside of the box." "Mighty Kiaxa, give me one of your spears," White Raven said. Kiaxa looked over his shoulder, and his lieutenants rushed forward with one. With the spear tip, White Raven nudged the smooth stone from the ash. Already it glowed white with perfection, which many chieftains seemed to acknowledge. "This is both spirit and stone. Only its magic can defeat no soul, but only one blessed by the stars can wield it. Watch what it does to Kiaxa's spear." With malice, White Raven pressed down upon it, pressing it to the earth with a sharp angle. But as he pushed his weight onto the spear, the stone relented, or so it appeared. Soon the sharp spear dissolved into powder, and the lashings and wooden hilt began to smoke, until White Raven tossed the maimed spear back to its holder. Next, he walked over to Waukesha. "May I have your drinking cup?" "Not if you're going to destroy it," Waukesha said, bringing laughter from his lieutenants. "I only need the water," he said, dumping it onto the stone with a sizzle of water. "When it sleeps, it is cool to the touch. But when provoked, the white egg can change any substance around it, which is why the earth bled blue." Winona's heart leapt when White Raven turned to the bear man and said, "Come, show them that you are marked by the serpent star." The white egg could betray him. Bearman sighed, glancing down at his axe as he passed. Soon he stood beside White Raven at the center of the council. His hands hesitated a few inches from the smooth stone, and then he clamped down on each end of the oval box, lifting the object with a grunt. "This is a trick," Kiaxa said. "Do you think we are old women? You cooled it with water so that he could lift it." In a flash, Kiaxa jumped from his spot, rushing to where Bearman held the stone. For a moment, Winona worried there would be a physical altercation between them, but LeSueur held the stone out for Kiaxa. The moment Bearman's powerful fingers released the stone, it slid right through Kiaxa's hand to the ground. Some chuckled, others cried foul. Kiaxa's mouth opened as his eyes stared at his empty hands. At his feet, tiny wisps of smoke came from the dark patches upon the stone. Then the blood began to drip from his hands. A strange moan came from Kiaxa's mouth, and Winona's heart broke for the man who had once made similar noises as a boy. The flesh from his hands is gone. Others could see what happened too, and Kiaxa fought through the pain to say, "I am sorry for doubting you." Then, turning to his stunned lieutenants, called out, "Bring me cloth from my wounds." Perhaps now they will listen, Winona decided, and beckoned both men back to their spots on the council. Chapter 91, Land of Memories, 1701. The Philosopher's Stone laughs at us. Pierre Charles LeSueur found himself glaring at it as they tried to decide what to do with it. Winona was right. This will break her nation apart. Wapasha remained firm. We cannot bring an evil object into the heart of our land. It does not matter who holds it. I will not allow it to enter into my lands. It shall stay here in the haunted valley where it belongs. White Raven also remained stubborn. For us to defeat evil, we must face evil. Let the wish we go to the cave of No Soul and battle him. You are basing this on an old tale women would tell their children, Wapasha maintained. We have always known an evil spirit lurks in the haunted valley, which is why we must return it where it belongs. The evil spirit lurks in the north, at the place of souls. We must be allowed to bring the stone north. Never. The Chippewas seek what we guard. They search for the place of souls, and once they find it, they will seek the white egg also. Suddenly, the local Sisseton supported the plan to send it north, which White Raven seized upon. When the Serpent Star came, it ended an era for the Seven Councils fire. Now the Chippewa come to fulfill prophecy. Either let them finish it, or let the Wishwe fight No Soul. You are Lakota, so I will forgive your ignorance about the Chippewa. There are dark sorcerers in their midst who desire to wake the evil spirit we call No Soul. Our sacred duty has always been and always will be to protect not only our people, but also all the people of the world. If you will not bury it here, then take it back with you to the west. We must preserve the world as we know it for as long as we can. That is our sacred duty. White Raven was beside himself. You would have us run away? Hide? You assume Bear Man can defeat No Soul? What if he fails? What will happen if he brings the white egg to the cave and is defeated by No Soul? Evil will descend upon the world, but that is what will happen. Everything we hold sacred will be destroyed. If the world must fall, fine. But I do not want to live long enough to see my children and grandchildren lose their world. So what will you do? White Raven asked. Fight to the last man like the fox? If we blacken our hearts to kill every enemy that steps foot on our land, isn't our world already lost? The guardians of the frontier have known about the coming of the white man for generations. Once we stood vigil upon the shores, until one day the first white man set foot, seeking what we have guarded. With your logic, our elders should have thrown down their weapons, embraced our enemies, and shown them the way here. No. We've fought for countless generations, and because of this fight, you were able to marry my beautiful daughter, bring her to a beautiful land, and raise beautiful children. Would you steal the future from them with a rash decision today? We will fight like the fox to give this future to generations countless years from now. We will delay the inevitable for as long as we can. Wapasha breathed heavily when he's finished. Or we could end it all today, White Raven countered. The French are coming from the east. The Chippewa are coming from the north. The Americans are coming from the south. How long can you hold off the future, Wapasha? We cannot wait for another Serpent Star to appear. We must act now. What if we've waited too long already? I was your age when the Serpent Star came. Perhaps we should wait for it to come again. Perhaps that will be our sign to fight a god in his lodge. LeSueur felt a hand upon his shoulder. Winona. Come, we must speak. I cannot listen to these fools much longer. As Wapasha and White Raven fiercely debated, LeSueur stepped away from the council fires to the shadows. I have a plan, but, she said, but I need you to say it. It must come from you instead of a woman, or else they will dismiss it. I've never questioned your wisdom. Tell me. Do you remember how we first met? How you rescued me from the camp of Chief Katiwa? Of course. It seems a lifetime ago. Yes, But the Fox returned to their ancestral homes because they believed it was their sacred duty. They returned to block all enemies from advancing past it. Yes, but what is your point? Do you agree that there is an evil spirit within that stone? Yes, which is why I think it is foolish to let your husband take it with him. Evil will follow wherever the stone goes. You can't put it back in the ground, or it will reveal itself once again. If I could, I would take it away from here, and somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, I would drop it into the sea. Winona nodded. I agree that we cannot put it back in the ground. My husband is right about it being a weapon, but the serpent star has left, and you are no longer a young man. The elders at Bear Lodge felt the serpent star would bring a series of prophets to us, until the time came for the final prophet, who would face no soul. I thought I was supposed to face no soul. I'm the Wishwe, right? You are one of the Wishwe. It was your destiny to unearth the stone, but to destroy it or throw it into the ocean would rob another of his destiny. If no soul must be faced, we must make sure everything is in order when the time is right. I don't understand. If you don't want me facing no soul, if you don't want to bury it, if you don't want to take it west, then what is your plan? He's going to make me say it. Isn't it clear what must happen? LeSueur shook his head. She told him what needed to be done. Chapter 92, Dauphine Island, September 1701. Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne caught his breath for a moment before turning to the next tree. He sized up his foe, and then, gripping his axe tightly, unleashed 10 consecutive blows before pausing. The wet wood had a gash 4 inches deep, and with another barrage, he would reach the core of the tree. Louisiana will be built by toppling one tree at a time, he told himself. After a short break, he continued, and with the final blow, the tree groaned, and the upper branches quivered before it collapsed in a heap upon the ground. All around him, the crew of men also worked. Some felled new trees while others hacked away at branches in order to create timber for construction of the new fort. Monsieur de Bienville, one of the men called out by his title instead of his given name. A ship approaches from the west. Jean-Baptiste set his axe down and immediately picked up his rifle. English? No, sir. It's a small craft. I believe it belongs to your brother. Antoine, he's supposed to be at Fort de la Bouille. I know where he's supposed to be. But that looks like his ship, doesn't it? Something must be wrong. He wouldn't have left his post on the Mississippi River unless something was wrong. Looking to the southwest, Jean-Baptiste and his dozen men stopped clearing trees and watched as the small sail craft crossed the final 10 miles of open water between the Mississippi Delta and the island that shielded the mouth of the Mobile River. He and his men waded out into the water to catch the craft and guide it to the white sandy beach. LeSueur has returned, Antoine said as he awkwardly jumped from the moving craft, stumbling into the arms of his brother. Impossible. Could he have done it? LeSueur's back? Jean-Baptiste asked, unable to keep himself from smiling. But he only saw Louisiana men in the craft. Where is he? We parted ways at Chandelier Island. Parted ways? He insisted on going to Fort Maurepas. But there's no one there but Monsieur de Brosbient and a handful of men. Did you tell him that Pierre has relocated the colony to the Mobile River to scout? I did, but he insisted on still going to Fort Maurepas, even without your brother. And then Antoine leaned in to whisper. LeSueur brought something back with him. Jean-Baptiste felt his heart skip a beat. Now that he was an adult, he'd gained membership to the Order of Eos alongside of his elder brothers. But it wasn't until he came to the new colony that Pierre told him the truth about LeSueur's mission to acquire the Philosopher's Stone from the heart of the continent. What exactly does he have? I couldn't tell you, but I could see it in the faces of the survivors that they paid a high price. Survivors? What happened? LeSueur wants me to fetch Pierre from Mobile to arrange for a ship to return to him at Fort Maurepas. That's all I know. All I know is that he only has a handful of men guarding barges. He doesn't want the whole colony to know what he found, Jean-Baptiste realized. Barges, eh? You did well, Antoine. I'll go to Maurepas and help LeSueur. You go fetch Pierre. It took Jean-Baptiste and his crew of 3 a full day to travel from Dauphine Island all the way back to Fort Maurepas. When he pulled into Biloxi Bay, he saw the strange barges and a canoe pulled up onto the shore below the fort. LeSueur sat alone on a wooden chest with an axe across his lap and 2 pistols beside him. A bell rang up on the bluff, but not a single man descended the stairs to greet them. LeSueur's beard once again hung down to his chest, and despite gray hair, he looked almost healthier than when he left. Having grown up in the shadow of the giant, Jean-Baptiste knew how to put a smile on his face. "You've grown fat." LeSueur laughed. "We ate buffalo all winter." "Is there a reason why no one is coming down from the fort to greet us?" "I promised to split open the skull of any man who came down the stairs." "I see." Jean-Baptiste looked over at the barges. Although tarped, it was obvious the barges still held cargo. 20 yards down the beach, he spotted 6 men sitting around a small fire. "Is that all that's left of your men?" "Of course not. The rest are all still back at Fort LeSueur, growing fat and making me wealthier by the day." LeSueur kicked the chest he sat up on. "I'd prefer not to talk about the rest in front of the men. I don't know. Why don't you send your men up to the fort to get some rest?" Jean-Baptiste turned again to the 6 camped on the shore, his own 3 men, and then up to the bluff where men looked down. He nodded. With that, LeSueur seemed to relax, and Jean-Baptiste sat next to him on the edge of the dock. "So what happened?" The longer LeSueur took to answer, the more the suspense grew. "I'm still in grave danger," LeSueur confessed. "What do you mean?" "At first, everything went exactly as we planned. We went all the way up the Mississippi until we found the tributary that led me back down to the place where the earth bleeds blue. Winter arrived early, so we were not able to begin mining until spring when the snows thawed. We were able to mine tons of copper, which we loaded into Pennicot's barges that you see over there on the shore." "Is Pennicot okay?" "Yes, he's just fine. I left Pennicot at Fort LeSueur because we'll be able to send a constant flow of copper here to the Louisiana Territory colony for the foreseeable future." "You didn't have any trouble with the Sioux?" "No. A few tribes came out of the wilderness to bring us furs, but I didn't dare openly trade with them or risk the fury of Montreal." "That's smart. So the old dream of uniting the Great Lakes to the Gulf is coming true?" "It appears so." LeSueur nodded, but then grew silent. "So, what's in the box?" Jean-Baptiste asked. "We found it," LeSueur said mysteriously. "It was hidden amongst the copper, and at first we thought it was just a strange rock. But it was perfectly carved and had a density that was almost supernatural." "Is it the lapis exilis?" Jean-Baptiste spoke the code word for the Philosopher's Stone. LeSueur smirked. "The Holy Grail?" "No, I'm not sitting upon the Holy Grail. You need to spend more time with learning your Latin instead of seeking adventure. elixir. I just mixed up the words. LeSueur winked. It's the bane of my existence now. I'm in grave danger, and now so are you. I hope you understand the perils we now face now that I've returned to civilization. Once we had a few barges ready, I no longer had a choice but to accompany it all the way back here. I couldn't trust these men with it. I understand. Pierre told me he didn't trust most of the men that were given to you out of La Rochelle. Both he and LeSueur looked out at the men sitting on the shore. After spending a year with them, I don't even think they were hired by LeSueur. But their documents, forgeries, really? LeSueur nodded. I think they were all English spies, especially Colin Nain. Those were the men I was least suspicious of. Jean-Baptiste shook his head in disgust and then gasped. Could they be saboteurs sent to destroy our colonies? I think it is possible. I couldn't say anything back at Fort LeSueur or risk having them turn against us. There were 12 of them and only 8 of us. That is why I insisted on having half of them come back with me. I left Gaston back at the fort with the others along with Nain. Verdi, our kin. That was a good idea. It's also why I must keep them isolated from the others. Who knows if there are more spies in our midst? When your brother arrives, I want them all discreetly arrested. What is your plan? As much as I would like to go back up the river to Fort LeSueur, I can't risk letting this strange treasure fall into the hands of our enemy. I am going to ask your brother for 2 ships. One will carry the copper back, and the other will be for myself, the miners, and this. LeSueur sat as he patted the chest. The Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 93. Bermuda, November 1701. Pierre-Charles LeSueur watched the horizon for pirates. Hundreds of miles into the heart of the Atlantic, Bermuda was a British colony with hundreds of little bays and coves to hide. Above his head, the French flag flew upon Le Berger, Le Moyne's trusty old frigate. The western wind filled the sails of the old frigate, and even though she was smaller and lighter than the lead frigate Noirtier, she could barely keep up as they left port. LeSueur still wore enough weaponry to kill a squad of men, even though none of Le Moyne's men dared even look at him as he stood vigil on the captain's deck. The captain of Le Berger approached his honored guest. If there is no danger lurking around Bermuda, we should be able to hide upon the open seas until we reach France. The greatest danger should still be behind us. There had been plenty of dangers. First, Spanish privateers attempted to attack between the Florida Keys and Cuba. Luckily, they'd had Pierre and Joseph Le Moyne's warships to repel the foolish attack. Once the small armada reached the Bahamas, English privateers took an interest in the heavily armed French armada coming out of the Gulf. Again, the 4 ships blasted their way out of trouble, but like a pack of wolves, pirates followed the fat prize into the Atlantic. The Le Moyne brothers hatched a plan with the other 2 captains to crisscross on the path to Bermuda, picking off the English privateers that trailed. By the time they neared Bermuda, none of the trailing threats remained. To avoid attention, only the Noirtier entered port, resupplying the other 3 ships for their destinations. The Le Moynes returned to the Louisiana colony as soon as Le Berger left unmolested from the waters of Bermuda. Now for the second part of your plan, dear Winona. LeSueur turned to the captain. I'm going to make an inspection. Would you like to accompany me on a walk around the ship? Now that we're under sail, I'm going to meet with my officers to take inventory of our supplies for the crossing. I'll join you again tomorrow for more tales of the frontier, the captain said, and offered him the extra set of keys. My apologies for ruining your life. Before leaving Biloxi Bay, LeSueur insisted everything was fitted with double locks. meaning that only the captain could hold the meaning that only with the captain could the holds be accessed. Today was different. Today he went alone. Deep in the cargo hold, LeSueur found the crates of vitriol, packed just as they had been back at Fort LeHoulier. Andre Pennicott had numbered them after creating the crates, but LeSueur only needed to search for crate 7. 7 fires. The symbolism for the Chippewa's 7 fires prophecy, the Sioux 7 council fires, and the Order of Eos stars in the Big Dipper, made the 7th crate the obvious choice. Even though Andre Pennicott, Francois d'Erec, and 2 Canadians and a pair of miners survived, none of them knew what LeSueur did when he returned with Winona and White Raven to Fort LeHoulier. With the same pry bar he'd used to open the first crate to show the curious captain, he popped off the support bars, securing the lid of the crate. Each crate held hundreds of pounds of moist vitriol. On the long trip back down the Mississippi River, most of the moisture in the vitriol had leaked out of the bottom of the crates, leaving the barges stained blue when they unloaded at Fort Maurepas at Biloxi Bay, further piquing the curiosity and excitement of the Lemoynes. But LeSueur insisted on keeping things secure. The crates of vitriol were divided between the 2 ships, but the treasure and witnesses remained with him. The prize is to be delivered to Alexander LeHoulier, he had said to the Lemoynes. We are only servants to another master. The task of retrieving it was given to me. None of them interfered with his mission and zealously escorted him to Bermuda. Now he opened a box that had been sealed for months. Inside of the 7th crate, pots and pans kept the contents dry, with packing straw from Fort LeHoulier's storehouse covering the vitriol. 2 years ago, LeSueur stood on the docks of La Rochelle with Isaac Newton's man, Colin Nain, explaining the situation. You're not going to need explosives, LeSueur had said as he surveyed the 2nd mining crew destined for the New World. We need to be ready for any situation, Colin Nain had said. My men will be able to extract anything from any earthly home. At the time, LeSueur wasn't sure if Nain belonged to Newton or LeHoulier. In the end, it didn't matter, as Gaston Verdy's snipers killed indiscriminately. After Verdy's ambush and White Raven's assault, the blasting powders remained where they'd been stored for the long winter. Long before being killed by the Dupree brothers, Nain had given a brief tutorial on the technology, including an explanation on how long the fuses would burn. LeSueur remembered every detail of the lesson. Now he took the fuses from the storage containers, inserted them into the dry containers of blasting powders, and trailed them out over Andre Pennicott's crates. 7 fires, LeSueur repeated as he lit the first of the 7 fuses. Quickly leaving the hold, he locked the double locks. No one can stop it now. He consciously took his time as he walked back up the steps, emerging near the bow of the deck. As always, he had 2 pistols strapped to his ribs, a cutlass strapped to his belt, along with the large dagger, knives inside of both boots, and his axe strapped to his back with a leather holster. When he walked amongst the crew, they all looked away. His hand grazed one of the many cannons as he walked toward the rear deck. My alibi. While the Nauchenier was fast enough to chase off unwanted visitors, the Le Berger had been one of Pierre Lemoyne's favorite warships during the War of the Grand Alliance. It packs quite a punch, he had boasted back at Fort Maurepas before they hatched the strategy. Winona had stood upon the deck. Winona had plans upon plans, and she helped him weave the predictability of the Lemoynes into it. The captain stood upon the deck, in front of the double-locked doors that held the true prize. LeSueur lingered at the bottom of the deck, continuing his count while also risking his life. Heavenly Father, your will be done. The explosion buckled the deck instead of consuming it in a ball of fire. The foremast groaned and immediately toppled forward, as it did, it pulled the decking with it, revealing a burning chasm below. Alarms and cries below followed closely behind the echo of the explosion, and LeSueur grabbed hold of the post at the bottom of the stairs as he felt his feet lifting. Let me reach them in time. Please, Lord, spare their lives for now. While crew members rushed to the deck, LeSueur ran down the rear stairs, where he found the confused jailer coming to them. Let them out. I need them alive. Unlock the brig. What happened? The jailer asked, fumbling for his key ring. Some sort of explosion below the foredeck, LeSueur said, having witnessed what would be attributed to gunpowder. Thank God, Samuel Brule said upon seeing LeSueur step to the door. Get us out of here. I need all of you as witnesses, LeSueur reminded the mix of survivors. If I save your lives, will you voluntarily return to imprisonment? A chorus of affirmation gave him his answer, and the jailer quickly unlocked the brig. Months earlier, they had made a similar pledge as LeSueur informed both groups of men that they were going to be spared, yet had to be divided for security reasons. For Derek's Canadians, including Samuel Brule, LeSueur found a way to spare them from the fires of Kiaksa, so they gladly traded a year of their lives to testify about the mutiny following the extraction of the Philosopher's Stone. Witnesses to a crime, witnesses to a lie. Since arriving in Louisiana, LeSueur had kept his witnesses as closely guarded as the crates. Lemoyne demanded all of them be executed as mutineers, but LeSueur insisted on bringing them with him. Now, back on deck of a sinking vessel, some of the crew fired off cannons to signal their sister ship, while others prepared the dinghies. My prisoners must be kept together, LeSueur shouted to the captain, and the 5 witnesses were hurried into a craft. LeSueur had to climb hand over foot up the stairs as the ship began to fill by the nose. The captain only glanced at him as he barked orders from the rear deck. He reached the locked door. He paused. Winona could not have planned it better than this. With a jingle of the keys, he dropped them, and the set of keys went sliding across the deck and over the edge to the deck below, followed by a loud curse. He took out his first pistol and blasted the lock, then the second pistol. He slammed his shoulder into the locked cabin door, but it was built to withstand boarding by a determined enemy, and even LeSueur's own weight could not bring it down. Help me! We can't let it go down with the ship! Help me! His axe began to make splinters of the door, but soon standing became almost too impossible. He smashed a hole in the door, leaving his axe wedged, and he had to lurch through the hole in the door to hold on. The stern of the ship bobbed almost vertically in the water, which rushed toward LeSueur's dangling feet. Just below him, the captain and officers now stood on the railing of the deck, still bringing order to chaos. As he held on, he could see the Naudinier circling around to support them. Help me! We must retrieve it! He shouted down to the captain. The ship is lost, the captain said, and they jumped off the side of the ship to the waiting dinghies. LeSueur pulled him up through the hole in the door and reached back for his axe. LeSueur looked to the separate locked hold they'd built in the cabin to house the smallest chest. He gave it several blows before the water appeared below the door. Too late for theatrics. He scrambled up the walls and used the axe to burst through the rear window where the cabin's desk once rested. In just seconds, he found himself looking at the exposed rudder. Jump, LeSueur! The captain called out to him. Swim to us! He looked back one last time at the locked casing, waiting for the waters of the Atlantic, and then he jumped into the water and swam for safety. Chapter 94. Versailles, France, 1702. Pierre-Charles LeSueur walked empty-handed into the estate of Alexander LeSueur with Samuel Brule and a miner named Aurel, hoping to be alive at the end of the day. All three were dressed for a king, even though King Louis had not been the one to question the terrible investment of a copper mine. Now, LeSueur needed to be appeased. If I can leave this place alive, I can have my happy ending. As expected, LeSueur's servants led the three to different places. Instead of a dungeon, LeSueur was led directly to the old alchemist. Alexander LeSueur sat in his eccentric study filled with books, maps, and scrolls. "Ah, our valiant knight has returned from the dragon's den. So, did they believe you?" "Yes, but you will believe the other lies I tell?" "I did not speak directly to King Louis himself," LeSueur explained, "but I spoke to some of his finance ministers. I provided them with the written accounts, the testimonies of the witnesses, and your evaluation of my copper." "Worthless mud," LeSueur said with a maniacal chuckle. "So, did they believe you?" "They certainly believed the vitriol was worthless. As to the rest of my story, I do not know. Brule and Aurel convinced them we left the fort in good standing, with everyone still alive. As far as King Louis is concerned, Fort LeSueur is fully functional as the French Empire's westernmost post, even if his men are dead." "Yes, but he believes his spy Gaston Verdi is still alive, doesn't he?" "He does, or else His Majesty never would have allowed us to leave alive," LeSueur said. "But will I leave here alive?" "The deceit will not last forever, and the men I leave behind will not be able to hold it for long without support. They will need to abandon the fort or receive immediate reinforcement. Without the continued financial support of King Louis, these men should be recalled to Fort La Roche, which still connects the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico." "And what tales will these men from Fort LeSueur tell?" "Exactly what I told them. They can be trusted, which is why I left d'Eric in charge after I left." "Etienne Delhut's man?" "The Canadians, yes. If not for their return, Gaston Verdi and his killers would have tortured the lot of us to death one by one. d'Eric helped turn the tide and restore control to the fort. If he hadn't, the Philosopher's Stone would still be found right next to your corpses. How tragic for good fortune to turn into such a catastrophe. I've finished my interrogation of the two witnesses and the crew of Leberger. As a man who's been repeatedly tortured, you must understand how pain reveals truth." "I understand they were more terrified of the Sioux fires than your simple tortures." LeSueur brought all five to France, knowing they could endure any torture. While they all agreed the same story after he freed them from Kiox's prisons, LeSueur also knew that they had been blind during most of that time. For d'Eric, he had been imprisoned at Crooked Root Lake, while White Raven retook the fort. They never knew what Gaston Verdi had done. The miners Aurel and Hagen had been tortured so badly that both were unconscious during much of the ordeal, and it wasn't until the barges passed through the Iowa territory that they understood how they'd escaped certain death. And the crew of the ship, the sinking left little doubt. "Is that what waits for me?" LeSueur asked the puppet master. "More torture?" "It breaks my heart to think of the Philosopher's Stone at the bottom of the Atlantic, and part of me wanted to simply throw you into the ocean to retrieve it. The Order of Eos has searched for so many generations only to find it lost so quickly after being found. I couldn't risk keeping it there. The Priory, the Jesuits, and even King Louis knew the general location, and beside mercenaries and assassins, I had wild Indian tribes to contend with at half strength. I had no other choice than to bring it with me. Perhaps discretion would have meant leaving it in the new Louisiana territory. Yes, now I wish I'd done that, but both Spanish and English pirates prowled the waters, despite the recent truth. If word leaked out that I'd found the Philosopher's Stone, nations would have come down upon those outposts. We could not have truly kept it there either. I think word has already leaked out. Why did you bring me the two miners? So that you knew I was your loyal servant. After my imprisonment in England, I knew my actions would be questioned. And for that reason, after Gaston Verdi began his slaughter, I knew those surviving miners could vouch for me, even under torture. Yes, they did confess to being agents of the English, which your 3 Canadians confirmed. So now that your name has been cleared, do I kill them? I spared their lives for another reason. Our enemy must learn what has happened. Newton fueled a war in order to advance his position, and so long as he believes the Philosopher's Stone is out on the frontier, he'll fight France for possession of the continent. Let him know what happened in Bermuda, and your rival will crawl back into his hole. The miners will tell him if they are freed. Yes, LeSueur smirked. I'm beginning to see why Delhut vouched for you, but you are not a man without secrets, are you? Ask your question and save the torture or the effort, LeSueur said. LeSueur glanced at his desk. Then he turned and retrieved the first box of copper vitriol LeSueur had brought to him. I've had this analyzed by several others, and none of them have seen anything quite like it. Granted, there is no practical value in this sample of the surviving chest of vitriol, but it is an attestation to the beliefs I've held. There is still old magic in the world, isn't there? The Philosopher's Stone was an end to two means, and you are a witness to its power. Perhaps one day we can retrieve it from the bottom of the ocean. This box of vitriol, however, still uplifts my spirits. It confirms that the legends are true. The alchemist produced a crisp roll of fresh white paper. With a wry grin, he unrolled it, placing paperweights on the corner to reveal a fresh copy of Jacques Marquette's map. It is known as the Oberon map. I thought you should know. And after proper study, we've deduced that it not only held the location of the Philosopher's Stone, but also showed the location of even more valuable treasure, if read properly. So this is your secret. I don't understand. Oh, don't be coy. It all makes sense now. We've always been aware of your connection to Father Marquette, but we never knew what happened to this map. Did the Jesuits reclaim it? Did Joliet steal it? Did one of the hired men have it locked in a bedroom drawer? It turns out that you had it all this whole time. We should feel fortunate that you came to us instead of your rivals. Marguerite. I've never seen this before in my life. Of course not. It is a copy. The real map is safely in the possession of Etienne Delhut, locked in a safe somewhere in Montreal. Your wife brought it to us. In fact, when she feared you were dead again, she brought it directly to Etienne Delhut, under your instruction, apparently. You have a loyal wife, LeSueur. It had been a contingency plan if he died. Marguerite obviously had thought the worst, but now that Eos knew he'd had it, it could unravel any future plans. The clock was now ticking. Don't worry, LeSueur. We know your worth, even if you kept the map from us. Honestly, if your wife hadn't brought it to us, we might have killed you rather than continue this charade for King Louis and Isaac Newton. While the rest of the world might soon laugh at you as a buffoon for building a copper mine where there is no copper, we know what you did out on the frontier. There is no other man alive who I'd rather send back. Back? What kind of self-made trap have I stepped into? Back, I had hoped to return to Montreal to my family, LeSueur bluffed. That was never the plan, but now the lie has been stolen from you. That is not going to happen. The Lemoyne family and Delhut have long spoken of your ambition to make a name for yourself. We are prepared to give you land and titles for one more great adventure. Land and titles? I'm a public failure. The Order of Eos understands the true nature of your failure, but acquiring the Philosopher's Stone was only part of a great puzzle. By finding it, you filled in the details to some of our ancient maps, and now we know where else we must search. There is much more work that needs to be done. What kind of work? You are going to be sent back to Louisiana to begin a second expedition up the Mississippi River. The only reason it worked the first time is because we used stealth. Of course, which is why you will lead a proper invasion of our new territory. Now that the Treaty of Ryswick has brought relative peace to Europe, it is time to wage war with these natives that keep acting as a thorn in our side. We will be rid of them once and for all, and as a reward for your leadership, we will grant you land and titles in our new Louisiana territory. How would you like the new colony of Alabama? Honestly, I'd like to see my wife and children. I'm no longer a young man. But you are a stout man, LeSueur teased. Besides, your wife has already packed the children onto a ship bound for her new estate in Louisiana. She's sailing down the Ohio River as we speak. Do they know of my full treachery? Is this all a trap? The Alabama colony? The Lemoyne family and the LeSueur family will rule the South as modern aristocrats. I've been made a lord, but still remain a puppet on a string. Chapter 95, Fort Mobile, Alabama, Spring 1703. With the stolen map back in the possession of Etienne Delhut, there was only one thing left for Bartolome St. Clair to do: clean up the mess. He glanced down the pool of blood, the chunks of flesh, and the crisping pieces of burnt fat. And then he looked up at the inverted corpse that hung from the rafters. He put his hand on the Canadian's chest, but felt only the coldness of death. "Oh, thank you for lasting as long as you did," St. Clair thought, and gave the body a final spin as he walked out of the room. Stepping back into the world, he became keenly aware of why the men stared, so he walked down the stairs from the bluff to the river. A little water clears us of this deed, he thought as he splashed water from the bay onto his face and arms. Behind him, he heard heavy footsteps. The Lemoynes. These greedy fools are splintering Eos. Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne, commander of the colony despite being in his early 20s, stood behind him waiting for a report. "We've been betrayed," St. Clair said without turning around. "By whom?" "LeSueur, you fool. I was right about him. He played you falsely, using the resources of your family, including your precious cousin Marguerite, for his own purposes." "What purpose?" "He stole the Philosopher's Stone out from under your nose." "No, I don't believe it. He almost died numerous times doing what we asked him to do. He's a damn hero. How could you say such a thing about him?" The Canadian told a much different story than what we would be led to believe. "Yes, we know the copper ore is worthless. We know that Gaston Verdi tried to steal the treasure." St. Clair scoffed. Since learning the truth about LeSueur, he had spent his time in New France, building evidence to convince the Lemoynes. After pressuring Marguerite, she produced the stolen map, swearing fealty to the family over her husband. Next, with the support of Delhut, he prepared to move against LeSueur, who'd already vanished into the wild. Delhut sent a team of men, Darac and the Canadians, to kill LeSueur, only to have the tables turned by another traitor, Verdi. The men left at Fort LeSueur did not abandon their post because of supply issues, nor was it because of an attack by Fox Indians. According to what I learned, Fort LeSueur was destroyed by the Sioux, who kept our men prisoner long enough for LeSueur to spin whatever lies he wanted. Why would LeSueur lie? The great work is at the bottom of the ocean. If I'd been allowed to do my job properly and unfettered, I would have discovered his treachery a long time ago, but now I am left to untangle his lies. But why would Derek lie? He was Delhut's man, as you say. Loyalty shift. Derek betrayed Delhut for LeSueur, and LeSueur... When I first came to the frontier, I was sent to kill Father Marquette, who had the stolen Aberon map and meant to acquire the stone for the Jesuits. LeSueur was a servant of the Jesuits. And after fabricating an identity as Paul Bonjean, he twisted the truth to ingratiate himself with the family. An agent of the Jesuits would bring the stone back to Rome, but an agent of the Jesuits? Jean-Baptiste turned back to the fort where the dead Canadian hung inside the torture chamber. A web of lies. My torture chamber will reveal the truth. I mean to get to the bottom of it all when he returns. You'd have a mutiny on your hands. LeSueur is a legend, and most of the men here are from Montreal. I don't mean to do it here, especially without your brothers, St. Clair said. After crossing the Atlantic, his ship will first make port in Havana, won't it? Of course. Why do all the men here believe Fort LeSueur was abandoned? Jean-Baptiste blinked as if being tested in school. Because LeSueur told them to say this? No. Who told them these lies? The man I just tortured never uttered the lies. Who spreads these tales? It was the carpenter, Pennicott. He was sent down by Derek after the Fox attacked Fort LeSueur. There was no Fox attack, St. Clair shouted while restraining his volume, leaving his maimed hands quivering for a knife. Where is Pennicott? The last I heard, he went up the Mississippi with some traders. Can you be more specific? You're talking about an area larger than the whole of Europe. Natchez. My brother saw the tribe as a threat, so he sent men to try to pacify them with trade goods until we have a large enough force to deal with them properly. Natchez, St. Clair repeated, making note of it. I want him locked in the brig when I return, so he can be properly questioned. I also want Francois d'Eric sitting in a cell also. Out of a dozen men who'd been left by LeSueur at Fort LeSueur, now only 2 witnesses remain. Soon lies will become fact. LeSueur doesn't know the full truth. If LeSueur slips past me, you now know what to do. What exactly do you want me to do? You are a man of the dawn now. You will do your duty, St. Clair stood. Now, find me passage to Havana so I can finish this. Chapter 96. La Rochelle, France, December 1703. Once again, Pierre-Charles LeSueur stood upon the docks of La Rochelle, about to embark on a voyage across the Atlantic. His officers and soldiers surrounded him as they loaded onto the warship Loire, which would take him to his reward, the Alabama colony. Inside his pocket, he had documents from Alexander LeSueur and Pierre Lemoyne, who had stayed in Paris for the past 2 years, arranging for weapons to be sent to Delhut in Lake Superior and for men to be sent to Fort Mobile. None of them know what really happened, LeSueur reminded himself, and very soon I will be in command of a warship. I can take the ship wherever I want. I am the bear man. Yet, looking around, he knew his neck was caught in a noose. Death waited for him back in the Gulf. If Delhut has not unraveled the lies, others will. I am a dead man. Bag by bag, his belongings left the cart and entered the 30-gun warship. Minutes away from boarding, a voice called out, "Hey, Beanpole! Beanpole, it's me!" LeSueur scanned the crowd, searching for danger. He found the source of the call in the form of a squatty beggar dressed in gray, standing in the shadows of unloaded cargo. The beggar slowly walked away. LeSueur took a few steps and stopped. Could it be Dubois? He would know to call me by that name. Somewhere in France, Dubois spent his golden years, but either for revenge or as a mission for the periphery, he lurked. Could Pennicott have contacted the periphery so quickly? Did he survive the trip down the Mississippi behind me? Alone? No. A chill went down his spine. Not Marquette. Not Dubois. Could it be the assassin, St. Clair? LeSueur pretended not to hear the call and turned to the last of the luggage. The gray beggar stopped walking away, his back still turned, hiding his identity. "Bonjean? Paul Bonjean? It's me, your old friend Jacques." A cruel barb, using the name of Father Marquette. LeSueur looked around for the jaws of the trap, knowing the gray beggar meant to lure him in. But LeSueur saw nothing of note, so he cautiously approached the beggar, baiting him in. Instead of continuing the charade and leading him into a dark alley, the beggar turned. Impossible. He's dead. I read about his funeral in Montreal. It can't be him. The face had become more wrinkled, but the keen eyes were the same. Gaspar, the rat, chief of the Petun, mighty Kondiaronk of the Huron Confederacy, stared back at him from 50 yards away on the docks. LeSueur had read all about how Gaspar had brought peace to the Great Lakes Indians, signing the accord himself in Montreal, but then dying the following day of a sudden fever. Sacre bleu, I read about his funeral in the newspapers. Yet the gray ghost, like a gray ghost, Gaspar walked right toward him, whispering as he passed, "Come with me if you want to live." LeSueur watched the old chief walk toward the busy avenue at the end of the docks. Turning to one of his men pushing his bags, he said, "I'll be back in just a moment. Watch over my belongings." He rushed to catch up to the chief, who almost vanished amongst the crowd. While keeping an eye on Gaspar, he looked around, sensing a trap. Men dressed in orange. A barrel fell onto its side, its lid rattling loudly on the ground. Empty. The man holding the barrel rose and joined Gaspar, walking in stride with him. In his hands, an object, a canteen dripping red fluid onto the ground. LeSueur looked down. It's blood. When he looked back, the second man stopped and turned to face him. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, an extravagant jacket, and a patch over his eye with a sparkling red gem. The good eye winked. Before LeSueur could even think of the man's name, the men with orange shirts converged, kicking his knees in from behind and throwing a bag over his head. As he struggled wildly, LeSueur heard a noise growing louder. So that's what the barrel was for. Then the beating began. Chapter 97. Havana, Cuba, July 9th, 1704. Today is the day you die, LeSueur. Bartolome St. Clair practiced in the shadows. The tall mass of the Pelican drifted into the channel to the ringing of bells. 2 small escort ships accompanied it. Bells rang a happy tune. Suddenly, Havana went from preparing for a possible attack to preparing for trade as the French flag announced the nature of the visit. El Morro Castle had been built by the Spanish to protect the city of 50,000 from pirate attacks, but more recently it had served to protect Spanish interests from English aggression. St. Clair had been stranded on the island for almost 5 months, waiting. Now I can finish what I started so long ago. Back in February, St. Clair fell into a deep depression when he discovered that LeSueur had vanished just prior to the departure of the LeSueur. His belongings had even been loaded, and the men had seen him on the docks, but a bloody trail into a dark alley indicated foul play. Even so, St. Clair pressed the men who came ashore. Professor Michael Sakar, a young Scottish historian aboard the LeSueur, told how the ship delayed departure a full day while the men searched in vain for LeSueur. Imagine his poor wife when she learns her position as Lady of Alabama has been stolen from her, Sakar said in February. Even great men must die. St. Clair drank to the sentiment. Even though it was a convincing story, St. Clair did not believe it. A few days later, another French ship brought news that LeSueur had been accosted by thieves, fought his way out of the trap, and was recovering his strength in La Rochelle. A few weeks later, news came to El Morro Castle that Pierre Le Moyne arranged for a ship full of supplies and young women to be brought to the new colony, and that a healthy LeSueur would accompany them on the Pelican. Now St. Clair prickled with anxiety as the big frigate passed by the protective walls that guarded the port built along the western shore. Dock workers immediately went into motion. Will my patience be rewarded? As the ship's planks came down onto the docks, St. Clair sat in the shade of the little tavern deck as the kitchen staff prepared for the rush of travelers. Yet the Pelican was unlike any other ship that had visited the port of Havana, and the city buzzed with excitement. Men, women, and children ran down the docks to await the travelers that disembarked from the ship. 4 priests, followed by 4 nuns, led a colorful procession of 20 young women dressed formally from toe to wide-brimmed hat. In the heat of summer, the scene was almost ridiculous, leaving the Cubans as stunned as he was. St. Clair kept his eyes on the docks. Next came a parade of 75 soldiers, laborers, and even a few families that consisted of women and children. The recent War of Spanish Succession, or Queen Anne's War as it was being called in the colonies, had delayed supplies and reinforcements to the French colonies of Louisiana and Alabama. Havana also desperately needed supplies, yet the promised arrival of the Pelican did not bring LeSueur, whose height kept him from hiding in a crowd. The 2 escort ships were just tying up when 4 men carried out a passenger on a stretcher. 2 men could handle a normal stretcher. 4 men meant they carried a passenger of some size. LeSueur of St. Clair burst from his table. "Sir, you left your bag," a voice called out. A man with a bandaged eye pointed to the bag with the poisoned wine. The bag also held a loaded pistol, a spare pistol, and a dagger, but his favorite knife remained tucked away near his chest. "Thank you. I almost thought about taking it for myself," the rogue said as he sipped from a halved coconut. When St. Clair reached the docks, he could see that the figure they carried was indeed Pierre Charles LeSueur, but also that LeSueur's skin was yellow and a black crust of bloody vomit had formed on his chin. "I will not let death steal you so easily from my grasp," St. Clair thought as he realized LeSueur had caught yellow fever. "You can bring him to my room. I am an old friend of Monsieur LeSueur. How long has he been this way?" "We left Cape Haitian on June 17th, and he seemed fine just 2 days ago," the dark-skinned Mogul sailor explained to the concerned crowd. "He needs a doctor." "Of course," St. Clair said to the stretcher-bearers. "But first, bring him to my room, this way." The 4 men labored to carry LeSueur up the stairs to St. Clair's room above the inn that overlooked the bay. "Go ahead and set him on my bed." he said, tossing his belongings out of the way. Would you like us to fetch a doctor? A laborer with a shaved head asked. No, I'll get him settled and call for one myself. Inform your captain that LeSueur will stay with me until he recovers. Your name, monsieur? I am the Baron of St. Clair Surrepte. He threw at the peasants. The four men bowed all the way to the door, and St. Clair was about to close it when the blond-haired man flashed a golden tooth and held out his hands in a cup. Aren't you forgetting something? St. Clair seethed, almost reaching for his knife. But the other three men were descending the stairs and within earshot, and St. Clair did not want to dispose of another body. I went out of my way to take care of the new governor, the tan sailor insisted. One moment, St. Clair said in a huff and went over to his table. He rummaged through a little basket until he found a few coins, which he dropped into the man's outstretched hands. G'day, sir. The sailor hesitated and then continued on his way down the stairs. St. Clair stood with his hands on his hips as Pierre-Charles LeSueur breathed in and out with an occasional grunt. Rest, he said, while reaching into his pocket to hold the knife. You are safe now. I will take care of you. We have much to discuss, you and I. LeSueur tried to say something, but only came out as a groan. Even from across the room, the stench was palpable. St. Clair had smelled death and dying before, but LeSueur had a different smell, both sweet and repulsive. So St. Clair walked over to the window and opened it. A stern knock came from the door, and St. Clair's knife leapt to his hand. I am Dr. Barrow. I was told the governor has contracted yellow fever. St. Clair opened the door slightly, his knife ready to come up through the visitor's chin. I've sent for my own physician, but thank you very much for coming. The nosy doctor looked past St. Clair to LeSueur. He looks grim. The men in the tavern below told me that you'd brought him up to your room. I can look after him until your physician arrives. Thank you, but he's doing better. I'll see to him, St. Clair insisted, closing the door and locking it. The stench from LeSueur was still overbearing, so he returned to open the other window. In the distance, he could see the entourage of pelican girls being led around the city that fawned over them. Below, he could see sailors gathering under the shade of the inn canopy. I need you to hold on long enough for us to talk. I'm a friend of the family, St. Clair said as he poured a glass of water. Some fresh water will help. Drink. LeSueur's shaking hand reached for the water, only to knock it over onto the floor. St. Clair took a chair from the kitchen table and moved it over to the bed. I need you to fight, LeSueur. I've waited too many years to just let you slip away like this. I still have so many questions. Do you remember Father Jacques Marquette? LeSueur began. Marquette, yes. Do you remember the map Marquette gave you? LeSueur shook his head. Marger. I know that Marquette gave it to you. How else would you know all the things that you knew? I allowed you a seat at the table to join in the great game, but you never even understood the stakes which you played. It's a shame you lost the key, but luckily you did not lose the map. Marguerite, LeSueur said, turning his head slightly to address the voice he did not see. She gave it to... Yes, I think I might have frightened her a bit. Once she understood its value, she gave it back to us. It always belonged to us. Now, I have some important questions for you to answer. LeSueur grimaced and turned his head away and whispered, So do I. St. Clair reached out a hand and forcibly turned LeSueur's chin back to him. When he did, the flesh on his face sloughed away as if the man were rotten. A strange yellow residue stuck to his fingers, and in that moment, the scent made sense. Dried urine and lemon juice. It's a trap. LeSueur's eyes opened wide with fury. A steel hand clamped onto the arm that reached over to turn his chin, and a moment later, LeSueur's left hand stopped St. Clair's other hand from finding the knife. "Have you been plowing with my heifer?" LeSueur asked crisply, quoting an obscure Bible verse St. Clair couldn't recall at the moment. LeSueur roared into his face, and his head launched into St. Clair's face with a crushing headbutt. A moment later, St. Clair felt himself being thrown from the bed and pinned to the floor, with LeSueur sitting on his chest. And then the crazed woodsman slammed his forehead into his face again and again and again, until darkness came. Chapter 98. Havana, Cuba, July 17th, 1704. 7 days after arriving in Havana, Pierre Charles LeSueur was laid to rest at La Necropolis de Cristobal Colon. With the Pelican having departed days earlier, he died among strangers, such as the English Dr. Thomas Barrow, Mughal navigator Narrowband, the blonde-haired, golden-toothed Jimmy Duke from Boston, the bald-headed, tattooed sailor Drake Murray, and the sullen Haitian cook Pierre Dulac. The only people who did know him kept their distance during the brief funeral service. One, a dead rat, waited aboard the Malay, anchored away from the busy port. The other was a man who had once taken a beating at LeSueur's hands at Mackinac. Louis Armand Guérin, no longer either a baron or captain, watched as his rival was slowly lowered into the earth. Guérin stood behind a palm tree, glancing around the other tombs and mausoleums. "From one aristocrat to another, may the flames of hell show you mercy," Guérin said as the dirt began to fall upon the coffin. Guérin's head remained on a swivel as the funeral came to an end, searching for more spies. One man dies, and another is born. Pierre Charles LeSueur, born 1657, Artois, France, died July 17th, 1704. The motley crew walked away from the gravestone and toward the row of palms that lined the cemetery. The men did not look up, but once they passed, the surly cook muttered to Guérin, "Was all that really necessary?" "Yes," Guérin snapped. "Our enemies are exceptional men, and will leave no stone unturned when searching for their answers." Dr. Barrow chuckled and then glanced at Guérin and added, "Oh, you are serious. I thought it was a pun." 2 blocks from the cemetery, a dinghy waited in the Rio Almeidares, where Master Gunner Benjamin Horn waited with pistol and cutlass. "Is he buried?" "It was quite touching," Jimmy Duke said with a smirk. "Good. The sooner we're back at sea, the better. I get nervous on dry land." "In a few weeks, we'll be halfway across the globe, boys," Guérin promised, exchanging his bandage for his red eye patch and broad-rimmed hat in the display of the dinghy. The river quickly led them away from the city of Havana to a small bay created by Punta Los Roques, off which a solitary ship, the Malay, now anchored, several miles from the main port. Captain Vincent Galloway gave orders from the deck, and even as the dinghy crossed into deeper waters, the sails were being readied to depart. It worked. The Lord must have wondrous plans in store for me. A giant loomed at the railing, and Guérin greeted him with, "Happy birthday, Charlie." Charles Johnson was not pleased. "He'll come around, eventually." "How was the funeral?" Johnson asked. "Pleasant," Guérin said, bringing chuckles from the men. "So now what?" the ogre asked. "We should keel-haul you for a few hours. You smell like piss," Guérin said. "Now we sail to Turtle Island, but not the one of Chippewa lore. It is known as Tortuga, and there we will meet with the rest of my crew and my ship, and we will begin a new adventure together." "What sort of adventure?" Johnson asked. You've thrown away the key, Garin said, but there is more than one way to pick a lock. What exactly are we unlocking? A vault that holds the greatest treasure on earth, Garin whispered. And we're going to steal it. Sacre bleu, the giant Charlie Johnson muttered. Epilogue. Havana, Cuba, 1718. I must make sure, Michael Sicard told himself. The Priory of Ormus will want no stone left unturned. Sicard waited until night, and then packed his knife, pistol, and a shovel. La Necropolis de Cristobal Colon was just a few blocks from the beach, and under the starry sky, he found his way without difficulty. The previous day, he'd walked through the sprawling cemetery. He found gravestones for men who lived to 100, infants who died the same year they were born, and one belonging to Pierre Charles LeSueur. Now he stood in front of the gravestone, looked for a moment, and then sunk the shovel into the earth. Since killing Lahatan 2 years earlier, a thought festered in his mind, forcing him to ask Isaac Newton's niece for funds to make the trip. Don't cause any trouble, Catherine Barton Conduit warned. We've won. Let my uncle's weary mind rest knowing he's beaten his enemies. I don't do this for myself or for Newton. I do it for the Priory. Once again, on the other side of the Atlantic, each shovelful of dirt brought him closer to the truth. It didn't take him long to hit the lid of the coffin, which in itself shook his confidence. I half expected to find just the tombstone. By the time he cleared away enough dirt to attempt to open the lid, Sicard was exhausted. He rested for a few minutes before continuing. The festering thought led him to intensely study French court documents, reread Baron Lahatan's new voyages to North America, and pore over tiny details upon maps, all while searching for the truth amongst the lies about Pierre Charles LeSueur. Now let's get a good look at you. After 14 years in Cuban soil, only bones, hair, and teeth remained of the corpse, along with a dozen saucer-sized stones surrounding the body. What is the meaning of the stones? A local custom? He stepped into the coffin and leaned forward to inspect the eyeless skull smiling back at him. The smile was broken by a small wire connecting 3 ivory teeth. Hair does not rot, he was told, and can remain for centuries. The hair upon the scalp did not concern him, but those who remembered LeSueur described a beard that extended to his chest. You, sir, have a bare chin. Sicard stood back up, took a step back, and then knelt beside the man's hands. The thin finger bones held no flesh and no fingernails, which also did not quickly rot. Finally, Michael Sicard laid beside the corpse, finding a space above and below where he rested, head to toe with the corpse. A 5-foot 8-inch corpse, apparently. He stood, dusted himself off, and climbed out of the grave, replacing the dirt scoop by scoop. Who are you, and where is the body of Pierre Charles LeSueur?